Hey guys, tonight we drift into the steamy, stone-paved streets of the Aztec capital Tenochtitlan where justice doesn't come quietly. It comes wrapped in thorns, smoke, and a fair amount of humiliation. Imagine yourself under a bright tropical sun, surrounded by pyramids and marketplaces, when suddenly, a group of stern-faced priests and judges drags someone into the square. You squint and see they're dragging him toward a cactus bush. Yeah, not for decoration, for punishment. Welcome to the Aztec Empire, where one bad decision could land you on the business end of a prickly pear. You probably won't survive this unless you're really good at sweeping floors and staying sober in public. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're watching from somewhere weirdly cold or weirdly hot, drop your location and local time below. I'd love to know who's listening while eating midnight toast in Norway or dozing off in New Zealand. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You shuffle forward in a slow, dusty crowd forming around the Tlatelolco marketplace. Everyone's murmuring. Not too loudly, this is still a court matter after all, and those high judges in feathered cloaks take things seriously. In front of the tribunal platform, a young man stands trembling in a cotton tunic stained with fruit juice. Apparently, he was caught stealing a few cacao beans, not gold, not corn, just the stuff used as small currency. The kind of thing someone might accidentally pocket after a long day. Unfortunately for him, even minor theft in this empire earns major consequences. Aztec law was obsessed with balance. You took something. You gave something up. Usually, dignity. Occasionally, blood. So today, this young man gets to meet his new dance partner, a cactus. Two warriors bring forward a spiny, oval-leafed nopal, you know it, as a prickly pear cactus. It's not the towering Western kind, but it's not something you want near your soft side either. The crowd shifts, someone coughs, and the boy is guided well, forced into kneeling. One of the elders steps forward, a baton in hand, and begins reciting charges. Theft from the public market, disrespecting the merchant class, risking imbalance between tribute and exchange. In modern terms, shoplifting and being bad for the economy. Then comes the punishment, public piercing. But not quite the bloody ordeal you might be imagining. Instead of full impalement, the boy is carefully rolled across the cactus pad. His back, legs, and arms are dragged slowly over the spines, not to kill, just to remind. The thorns snap, scratch, and sting. He gasps, whimpers, but doesn't cry out. Probably because he's surrounded by neighbors and possibly his mother, who's watching with a grim frown and two half-priced melons under her arm. Once the rolling stops, the thorns are pulled out one by one, not by a healer, by a temple assistant who looks like he'd rather be doing anything else. The process is slow, ceremonial, and intentionally mortifying. The message is clear: steal from the community, and the community will see you suffer just enough to keep the memory in your skin. Historians still argue whether this particular cactus rolling punishment was used exclusively for theft, or if it sometimes served as a warning sentence for youths straying into worse crimes. Some codices mention variants involving thorny reeds or maggy spines inserted under the skin for symbolic cleansing. Others say it was just a very dramatic show to keep the market square in order. And while we're here, let's not skip the additional touch. The offender is forced to sweep the square afterward, with actual brooms made from bundled reeds, while bleeding, with everyone watching. So you're not just embarrassed, you're now the evening's entertainment, ancient gossip gold. Now picture yourself as a young seller nearby. You've got your squash neatly stacked, your tamales arranged just so, and you're trying not to glance at the bleeding kid doing a sad little shuffle with a broom. This is the point, of course. The Aztecs didn't just punish, they performed justice. Publicly, visually, repetitively. If you saw someone get cactus rolled once, you remembered for life. Even minor crimes got maximal flair. There's a record of a woman caught cheating at the scales, probably shaving off corn weight to make a few extra cacao beans. She wasn't fined, she wasn't jailed. She was paraded around the square with her hair cut unevenly and her clothes torn in deliberate patterns to signify disgrace, modern shame-walking, but with more flair. A fringe story from a colonial chronicler suggests some thieves were tied to poles beside piles of what they stole, then left out all day as people shouted insults and occasionally pelted them with spoiled fruit. Think stocks, but with extra guacamole thrown at you. Still, this wasn't about cruelty for cruelty's sake. The Aztec system cared deeply about social cohesion. It just believed that cohesion required the occasional public ouch. Mercy existed, but it wore a stone face. First-time offenders sometimes got a warning, but that warning often came with symbolic bloodletting or fasting. Yes, you could be sentenced to skip dinner for 3 days as penance, which sounds manageable until you realize that skipping tamales in Tenochtitlan might be worse than cactus thorns. Of course, class mattered. A noble caught stealing might avoid the cactus, but face something arguably worse: exile from their Kalpalethi neighborhood group that defined their entire identity. Being cut off socially was devastating. And unlike the young man currently sweeping prickly pads off the plaza floor, they couldn't even make it up by sweeping. Nobles didn't sweep. That was part of the punishment too. And now, as the sun begins to lower behind the temple mayor, casting long golden beams across the plaza, you step back from the crowd. The offender is limping, bleeding lightly, face flushed from shame more than pain. The brooms are returned. The cactus is carried away. Someone buys a handful of squash like nothing happened. But you? You feel the itch of ghost thorns along your spine. You glance at your coin pouch, tighten it, and decide you're definitely not stealing anything anytime soon. You walk on. The crowd drifts away. The marketplace hums again with bartering and gossip, and somewhere in the shadows, the priests reset their thorns, ready for tomorrow's performance of justice. Because in the Aztec world, the law isn't blind. It's covered in spines, painted in public, and absolutely watching you count your cacao. You're still rubbing your arms, half from sympathy pains, half from sheer disbelief that a society this complex and advanced chose cactus rolling as its go-to opener for petty theft. But if you think the Aztec punishment menu ends there, buckle up, or better yet, brace yourself for a hot, smoky, eye-watering twist. Because tonight, you're about to experience what happened when Aztec kids got out of line. No grounding, no timeouts, just a face full of chili smoke and a lifetime of respect for parental authority. You shuffle along a narrow alleyway behind a family compound made of mud brick and cane. Inside, you hear it, the low grumble of a parent, a sharp wooden thump, and a child's nervous whimper. You peek around the woven mat doorway, expecting to see a scolding. Instead, you see a clay brazier, a pile of dried chilies, and a boy tie-dyes, tied to a small bench. And suddenly your sinuses start tingling just watching it. The Aztecs believed children needed correction early and often. The Comacac schools for noble youth were famously strict. But even before formal education began, home discipline made it very clear. You disobey, you suffer. Aromatically, chili smoke, or iliac, was one of the empire's favorite tools for correcting bad behavior. Run away? Talk back? Skip chores? You got the smoke treatment. And not just a quick puff in your direction. Number. This was a full-body sensory experience. Dried chiltepins or other native chilies were tossed into hot coals or clay pans until they sizzled and smoked with eye-stinging potency. Then the child, usually under 10, was held near the smoke in a small enclosed room. Not forever. Just long enough to cough, cry, and reconsider every life decision they'd made up to that point. Historians still argue whether this punishment was daily discipline or reserved for the truly unruly. Some codices show chili smoke being used in school dormitories, suggesting it may have also worked as a kind of general curfew enforcement. Others argue it was mostly symbolic, more bark than burn. But when you see that kid's eyes watering like a cracked aqueduct, you realize there's nothing symbolic about what he's feeling. You inch closer. The air burns with the sharp, earthy smell of roasted chilies. It curls under the roof beams, seeps into the woven walls. One deep inhale and you're coughing, blinking, eyes stinging. You backpedal straight into a pile of maize baskets, and now everyone in the room is looking at you, including the boy, mid-sniffle. You nod politely, pretending this is a tour group. It is not. But you've seen enough to know. Aztec parents weren't playing around. And it wasn't just chili smoke. Other punishments involved holding a child over burning coals not close enough to scorch, but definitely close enough to sizzle the fear into them, or binding their wrists behind their back and forcing them to kneel for long periods in the temple courtyard while being pelted with corn husks. Think of it as early behavioral therapy, minus the talking. A fringe tale from a Nahua elder claims some particularly wild teens were made to sleep in burial caves for a night to learn humility from the ancestors. Whether that's true or just ghost, story parenting, the idea tracks with a society that believed pain, shame, and sacred smoke were better teachers than soft words. You move on, but the chili sting lingers in your nose. Along the way, you pass a school group rows of young boys in plain tunics, hair shorn close, walking in silent formation. They don't laugh. They don't talk. You know why. Their instructors carry staffs tipped with obsidian flakes and bags of, you guessed it, chilies. Even nobles weren't exempt. In fact, high-ranking families were expected to discipline their kids more severely. One codex shows a noble child being pierced with cactus thorns under the fingernails for arrogance. You wince at the thought. You also make a mental note to text your parents a thank you message the next time you think they were harsh for limiting screen time. But maybe the most fascinating thing is how these punishments weren't necessarily viewed as cruel. They were preventative, kind, even. Let the child feel chili smoke now so he doesn't feel obsidian blades later. Teach respect in the home so you don't have to teach remorse in court. Harshness was protection, tough love with actual fire. And the kids? They adapted. You overhear one boy casually telling another that his older brother got the 3-smoke treatment last week for skipping night prayers. They say it like a weather report. You wonder how anyone had tear ducts left by adulthood. You walk a little further and find another courtyard, this one quieter. An elderly woman is teaching 3 young children how to grind maize on a metate. One girl fidgets. The woman raises a chili pod slowly. The girl stops fidgeting. Lesson learned. At dinner, the family gathers to eat tamales with actual chilies, instead not burning smoke, but flavorful heat. And here's the strange twist. The same food that punished them is also what comforts them. A child who cries during the chili smoke session will gladly munch on spicy stew a few hours later. The difference isn't the chili, it's the ritual. Food and punishment, reward and discipline, they all use the same ingredients. It's context that changes everything. A curious scholarly note suggests that the use of chili smoke may have influenced later colonial punishment rituals, including smoke-based cleansings in church-run schools. If so, it means this little Aztec habit outlasted the empire itself. That's one spicy legacy. As night falls and the fires are doused, the coals that once sizzled chili pods now glow softly beneath dinner pots. The boy you saw earlier emerges from the shadows, wiping his eyes and rubbing his nose. He's not bruised, just quiet, thoughtful. Maybe tomorrow he'll remember to sweep the steps without being asked. Maybe not. But one thing is certain, he'll never forget the smoke. Neither will you. Your eyes are still a little watery from all that secondhand chili smoke when you round a corner and nearly trip over an old broom. Not a mystical broom, just a rough bundle of reeds tied with twine and worn nearly flat at the bristles. And beside it, leaning against the wall of the neighborhood courthouse, stands a teenager with the universal slouch of someone who's made a poor life choice and now deeply regrets it. You've entered the gossiper's gauntlet. In the Aztec Empire, speech wasn't just a tool, it was a responsibility. Gossip, slander, and public trash talk weren't taken lightly. If you spread falsehoods or stirred up drama in the neighborhood kalpuli, you didn't just get a stern talking to. You got sentenced to sweeping duty, and not the quiet, tidy kind either. This was justice by humiliation, dustpan optional. The offender this time is a local boy, maybe 13, who supposedly told one girl that another girl was secretly eating her family's stored beans. The beans weren't touched, but the rumor took root like a tomato vine in monsoon season. Fights broke out. Parents complained. Elders got involved. And now he's here, holding a broom that looks older than his sandals, preparing to scrub the entire public square while everyone watches. This wasn't a punishment invented out of nowhere. The Aztecs considered speech sacred. Used properly, it honored the gods. Used carelessly, it created disharmony. To control this, they had an entire set of penalties for verbal offenses. Spread lies, sweep the plaza. Insult an elder, sweep the plaza. Cause two families to feud over made-up drama, sweep the plaza twice. You watch as the boy starts moving debris from the temple steps, muttering under his breath. Two local women sit nearby, sipping something from clay mugs and not even pretending not to stare. This is part of the punishment to public judgment. The sweeping isn't really about cleanliness. It's about being seen. It's about quiet labor replacing loud talk. Historians still argue whether this sweeping punishment had deeper ritual symbolism. Some believe it mimicked the duties of temple acolytes, who cleaned sacred spaces to restore spiritual balance. Others say it was a form of forced submission, a way to make someone kneel, physically and socially, in front of the community they disrupted. You step back and watch the boy drag his broom across a patch of packed earth for the third time. It's not particularly effective, but effectiveness isn't the point. The point is that he's here, working, sweating, probably planning to never open his mouth again. Nearby, another teenager arrives, clearly arriving late to join the fun. She's carrying her own broom and doesn't look happy about it. You overhear that she accused her neighbor of stealing herbs for love spells. That neighbor turned out to be the daughter of a respected healer, and suddenly boom, more sweeping. Gossip didn't just stir personal drama, it could damage reputation, property, or even health. That was enough to make it criminal. In fact, chroniclers from the post-conquest period mention entire neighborhood councils dedicated to resolving verbal disputes before they reached court level. But if they failed, and you were caught lying or scheming, the consequences came swiftly and almost always involved a broom. A fringe account even tells of an elderly merchant sentenced to sweeping duty for bragging too loudly about his own business. Apparently, his exaggerated claims caused panic in the local maize market. Whether or not that's true, it suggests that even boastfulness, if disruptive, could cross the line into punishable speech. You notice that the sweepers are starting to finish up, sweat sticking their tunics to their backs. A priest steps forward, inspecting the work. He points out a missed spot, maybe on purpose, and makes them redo the edge of the stairway. Both groan. You sympathize. You also try not to smirk. And then, the real kicker. Once the sweeping is done, they're required to sit still at the center of the plaza for the rest of the day. They aren't tied up or gagged, but they're forbidden to speak. Not a word. If they do, the punishment resets. It's the Aztec version of mute mata with dust. They sit, they squint in the sun, people pass by, drop little comments, maybe even laugh. But the kids stay silent. One of them stifles a sneeze. Another picks at a frayed sandal strap. And you realize, this isn't physical punishment. It's social correction. They're being reintegrated into the community through silence and service. It's not forever. They'll go home tonight. They'll eat with their families, probably get a second lecture over tamales, and sleep a little harder than usual. But tomorrow, you can bet they'll think twice before whispering nonsense in the marketplace again. You wander on, brushing dust from your tunic. The wind picks up, and a swirl of leaves drifts across the plaza. For a moment, you're alone. Then you see an older man sweeping the temple steps voluntarily. Not as punishment, just as a habit. Maybe once, long ago, he sat silent like those kids. Maybe now, he sweeps to remember. You smile, and walk on. You're starting to get used to the rhythm of Aztec justice, now equal parts, practical, symbolic, and ever so slightly theatrical. But just as you think you've got it figured out, you round the edge of a ceremonial garden and spot a young woman in the middle of something that makes sweeping duty look like a day spa. She's barefoot, her head bowed, and her scalp recently shaved. You blink. There's a line forming, elders murmuring, priests watching, and nearby, a man pacing nervously like someone who knows he's about to be the least popular person in the neighborhood. You've just walked into a trial for adultery. The Aztec Empire took marriage extremely seriously. Not just for love or social order, but for cosmic balance. Marriage wasn't just about two people, it was about two clans, two kalpuli, even two gods in union. So when someone broke that trust, it wasn't just scandalous. It was dangerous. It risked spiritual imbalance. And the punishment? Oh, it started with a haircut. But it didn't end there. You watch as two older women step forward with ceremonial blades obsidian, sharp enough to shave a comet. The young woman kneels without protest. Her long, dark hair is already uneven, the work of a previous cut, but now they finish the job. Close to the scalp, almost to the skin, not out of cruelty, out of visibility. Because in Aztec society, hair told a story and baldness screamed that you'd written the wrong chapter. You glance at the man now. He's still pacing. A priest grabs his arm and pulls him forward. He's not shaved, but he's also not smiling. His tunic is turned inside out, a visual signal of disgrace, and his feet are painted red with a dye made from crushed cochineal insects, which, honestly, is just adding insult to infidelity. Historians still argue whether both parties in an adultery case were always punished equally. Some codices suggest harsher treatment for women, especially married ones. Others argue it depended on class. Nobles might receive symbolic punishments, while commoners faced more corporal penalties. But here, tonight, they seem evenly matched in shame. Public, measured, memorable. The priest begins chanting a series of accusations, each one matched by a burst of incense thrown into the brazier. The smoke curls into the air, a visual reminder of the sins being cleansed or at least catalogued. The crowd is silent. Someone coughs. Someone else mutters that the young man used to work in the tribute office, and this explains everything. Now the priest announces their fate. The woman will wear rough clothing for a season, no dyes, no patterns, just coarse cotton. She will live temporarily in the temple compound, performing labor for the priestesses, not imprisonment, exactly more like spiritual community service. The man, meanwhile, is sentenced to public beatings for 4 days at dawn, followed by isolation in a small hut where he'll fast, meditate, and, one assumes, rethink his life. But it's the shaving that will follow them longest, because even once their labor ends, the memory of those bare scalps will linger. Hair takes time to grow back. And in a society where it signaled maturity, respectability, and status, a freshly shorn head was a billboard that screamed, "I made a mistake." You follow them as they're led away, her to the temple, him to the edge of the plaza where the beating sticks wait in a neat little pile. They don't resist. There's no shouting, just quiet resignation, and the slow shuffle of people who know they'll be gossiped about at dinner for weeks. As you walk, a fringe story floats into your mind, one told by an elderly woman chewing maize paste near a temple stair. She says that in some rare cases, adulterers were given a final chance to save their dignity by confessing before the gods in total honesty, even if that meant implicating others. If they told the full truth, they might avoid beating, but if they lied, the punishment doubled. She claims to have seen a man flogged and force-fed raw maize paste for lying during his confession. Whether she saw it or just really hated that guy, who's to say? Now you reach a small side courtyard, where a group of younger teens are whispering and laughing, probably at the expense of the newly shaved. A stern teacher nearby gives them a look, and the laughter dies instantly, because even watching punishment too gleefully could draw attention. You might not be guilty today, but if your hair's too long and your joke's too loud, you could be tomorrow's lesson. The irony here? The Aztecs also valued beauty, grooming, and public appearance. Hair was often decorated with ribbons, oiled, perfumed. Losing it wasn't just about shame, it was about stripping identity. You couldn't hide it. You couldn't style your way around it. You just had to walk around town as the visual embodiment of broken trust. You pause at a reflecting pool and look into the water. Your own hair stares back. You smooth it instinctively, grateful for the obscurity of your hypothetical innocence. Somewhere behind you, a priest beats a drum once, solemn and echoing. You can't see the punishment anymore, but you can feel it. Not in the body, in the social fabric. You don't mess with marriage in the Aztec Empire. Not unless you're ready to lose more than love. As the sun begins to dip and the courtyards start to clear, you pass another woman, head shaved, but smiling faintly. Her punishment is over. Her hair is just starting to grow back, a fuzzy halo over her scalp. She carries a basket of herbs, nods to you, and walks on. Forgiveness exists here, but not in visibility. You wander past the last traces of that shaved shame parade, your own hair feeling like a crown of gratitude now, and duck into a quieter alleyway thinking you've earned a break. But the scent hits first pungent, smoky, and faintly sweet. Not incense. Not food. Something in between. You follow it like a cartoon character drifting toward pie on a windowsill, and soon you're face to face with the Aztec Empire's least festive celebration, the punishment for drunkenness. The scene ahead is strange. 3 men sit in a row, slumped against a wall. Their faces are painted in bold, awkward streaks, jagged red lines down the cheeks, mismatched circles on their foreheads. One poor guy with what looks like a giant spiral curling over his entire nose. This isn't tribal face paint, it's humiliation paint. And behind them stands a temple assistant with a small bowl and a brush, dabbing on another layer of disgrace. Here's the thing. The Aztecs were no strangers to alcohol. They had pulque, a mildly fermented drink made from the maguey plant. Thick, cloudy, slightly syrette, looked like if kombucha and oatmeal eloped and had a baby in a gourd. But while pulque was deeply embedded in religious life, it was not meant for drunken fun. Drinking to the point of stumbling, especially if you weren't a priest, a noble elder, or a respected warrior at a ritual banquet, was a serious offense. If you were underage, even worse. In fact, it was one of the few crimes that could earn a death sentence on the first offense. Historians still argue whether that threat of execution was regularly enforced or mostly a dramatic deterrent. Some suggest first-time offenders might have been given a public flogging, face paint shame, and then released with a warning. Others think certain regions were harsher than others. But nobody disputes that being caught tipsy in the wrong context could turn your night into a morning of pain and decorative regret. The three men before you groan softly. Their heads wobble. Their eyes are red, but not from chili smoke this time. One of them attempts to speak, but the assistant waves him silent. This part of the punishment involves sitting perfectly still in public, painted and motionless, as a warning to all. Think of it as a hungover statue garden of poor decision-making. And the paint isn't random. Each color and symbol represents a layer of disgrace. Red spirals for disrespect. Black stripes for rule-breaking. Yellow marks for youth and foolishness. The most intricate patterns go to those of higher status nobles and students who, by law, should have known better. One of the men wears a partially erased glyph on his shoulder, suggesting he was once training for the priesthood. Not anymore. You shift back slightly, trying not to look like you're enjoying the scene too much. After all, this is meant to be solemn, educational. You're supposed to see it and think, well, I'll just have one pulque next time, and no more. But a part of you, maybe the deeply modern part, can't help but feel like this is the ancient version of a college walk of shame, only with less glitter and more moral symbolism. Then comes the next stage. A priest emerges, carrying a small drum and a bundle of reeds. He taps the drum twice short, sharpen the men stand. Or, more accurately, wobble to their feet like seaweed caught in a current. They're marched slowly through the square while people watch. No one jeers. No one claps. This isn't punishment as entertainment. It's theater as warning. A fringe tale, whispered by a temple servant nearby, claims that in rare cases, repeat drunkards had their mouths pierced with cactus thorns, symbolically closing their lips to future indulgence. Another version says they were given bitter herbs for days to make the taste of alcohol unbearable. Whether those were officially sanctioned or just neighborhood scare tactics is anyone's guess, but you feel your stomach turn just imagining a cactus mouth cleanse. As the painted trio disappears down the street, led by temple assistants and trailed by silence, you glance at the small bowl of paint left behind. It's still warm, still sticky. You dip a finger in it. Smells like ash and crushed berries. You resist the urge to try it on your own cheek. You've made it this far without looking like an Aztec mime. No need to start now. Instead, you follow the trail toward a nearby courtyard where a priest is lecturing a group of teenage boys. They sit cross-legged, eyes wide, as he explains the symbolic danger of overindulgence. Drink too much, and you disrupt your body's balance. Disrupt your balance, and you offend the gods. Offend the gods, and well, now you're spiraling into cosmic punishment. You start to wonder how anyone got through a feast without becoming divine cannon fodder. But that's just it. Feasting was allowed. Even sacred. But only in moderation. The Aztecs weren't anti-pleasure. They were pro-boundary. And when those boundaries got crossed, the punishment wasn't just about pain. It was about shame that lingered like the smell of old pulque. As twilight drapes itself over the city, the painted men return. Their designs are smeared, now sweat and shame will do that. But the message still lingers. They bow to the priests. One mutters something that sounds suspiciously like an apology. Another just shuffles to a nearby bench and collapses. And just like that, the square returns to normal. Merchants resume setting up for tomorrow. Priests file back into the temple. Children race past, laughing and tossing maize husks at each other, one of them mimicking a tipsy stumble for fun. His mother yells, grabs his ear, and drags him home. No paint, no beating, just the echo of what he saw today. You inhale slowly, and even now, the faint scent of berry ash and fermented Maggie clings to the air. You exhale, then keep walking, feet steady, mind buzzing. Maybe just water tonight. You take a few more steps along the edge of the plaza, letting the heavy air settle in your lungs equal parts dust, dusk, and the sticky memory of shame paint. But before you've even wiped the scent of pulque from your imagination, there's another stir up ahead. A small group has gathered near the edge of a maize field just beyond the urban perimeter. No feathers, no drums, just silence, save for the squelch of something being pulled from the earth. You inch closer, and then you see it. A man middle-aged, muddy from the knees down being hauled face first out of a low, damp pit. He's covered in streaks of brown, humiliated, but not injured. A crowd watches, stone-faced, as two guards drag him toward the nearest platform. His offense? A property dispute that got way too dramatic. He claimed land that wasn't his, ignored the council's decision, and decided to start building anyway. And now, thanks to the always-on-point Aztec justice system, he's getting an all-natural mud bath. In the Aztec Empire, land was sacred. It wasn't just about crops or territory, it was about lineage, harmony, and divine stewardship. Land disputes threatened not just neighborhood peace, but cosmic balance. So when arguments escalated, punishment had to be swift, symbolic, and ideally messy enough to leave a lasting impression. Enter the ceremonial mud pit. This wasn't just random humiliation. It had layers. The guilty party was forced to lie in the fields they falsely claimed literally grounded in their greed. Depending on the region, they might be buried up to the neck, rolled in mud by ceremonial sweepers, or, as in today's case, planted in a symbolic hole for a full cycle of the sun. You feel a sympathetic itch just watching him wipe dirt from his eyebrows. Historians still argue whether these punishments were used primarily for agricultural theft or whether they extended to cases of inheritance and communal land confusion. Some sources mention specific glyphs etched into mud platforms that were meant to absorb the guilt like a sponge. Others suggest that the visual spectacle was designed to warn other would-be land grabbers. Nothing says, "Don't mess with property law," like being mistaken for a tree. You linger as the man is brought before a tribunal stone and forced to kneel. A priest reads aloud his offense, then gestures toward the landmarker stone nearby, a tall basalt slab carved with glyphs and family crests. The man's own glyph has been scratched out, not erased, but crossed, a visible sign of dishonor. His claim is revoked, his name shamed. And the worst part? He now owes the council labor for 3 full moon-shelping build communal storage houses he tried to control. They hand him a reed broomies, another one and a tattered tunic that marks him as under punishment. You're starting to notice a theme here. Shame is the most fashionable fabric in Tenochtitlan. A fringe account by an early post-conquest scribe tells of a man punished for stealing not land, but water-diverting irrigation from another family's plot during a dry month. He was made to carry jars of river water uphill for 5 days straight to repay the flow he disrupted. Was it real? Possibly. Symbolic justice often flowed right alongside practical consequences. You follow the disgraced man as he trudges into the maize field, now ordered to tend the very crops he once tried to control. The guards don't yell. They don't need to. The punishment works because everyone is watching, and watching matters. In Aztec society, justice was a public performance designed to educate. You weren't just punished for your sake. You were punished as a kind of moral billboard for the rest of the neighborhood. The law didn't whisper in the shadows, it shouted in full color, with dirt and reeds and the occasional splatter of fermented chili paste. You take a seat near a row of small shrines, each one dedicated to agricultural deities, Tlacuas, spirits of rain and fertility. Offerings sit in tiny bowls, maize kernels, cacao, feathers. One has a little carved hoe beside it, worn smooth by years of prayer touch. It reminds you that to the Aztecs, farming wasn't just labor, it was sacred labor. To interfere with it selfishly wasn't just petty theft. It was spiritual sabotage. As the sun slides lower, The punished man finishes hoeing a section of field and pauses to stretch. A child runs past, pointing and laughing before their mother pulls them aside with a sharp word. Another reminder. Mockery wasn't encouraged. Justice was to be witnessed, not ridiculed. By the time you rise and dust off your tunic, the man has already faded into the scenario and more bent back among the workers. But you know he'll be remembered. For a while, at least. Mud takes a long time to come out of reputation. You wander back toward the city as night begins to settle. The torches lighting along the causeways like fireflies, stitched into the dusk. Somewhere nearby, another land dispute is probably being discussed. Hands waving over a carved map, voices raised but still bound by protocol. But one thing's certain. No one's going to steal a corn plot tonight. Not while the mud is still wet. You step out of the maize fields, just in time to hear a commotion rising from the central square. Low gasps, a few sharp laughs quickly silenced, and the unmistakable sound of ceremonial drums thumping with slow, deliberate finality. You follow the sound, threading between thatched rooftops and adobe homes, until the plaza yawns open before you. There, standing stiffly under the harsh stare of a carved eagle, is a man whose face is oddly serene. A thin cloth wraps his eyes, and where his nose should be, well, let's just say you suddenly become very aware of your own nose. You've arrived just in time for one of the Empire's more permanent solutions to repeat thievery. Forget warnings, forget sweeping, forget even chili smoke. When someone stole again and again, disregarding both the law and their own bruises, they faced one of the most unsettling punishments the Aztecs devised. Nose removal. Brutal? Yes. But to them, strangely rational. Aztec law operated on a scale, and theft had a gradient. A child who pilfered cacao might get a symbolic punishment. A market woman who shortchanged someone got fined or shamed. But if you stole repeatedly, especially from temples, community stores, or tribute, piles, your punishment had to be visible, forever. And nothing says, "Don't trust this guy," like a face missing its central feature. You watch as the priest steps forward, placing his hand lightly on the man's shoulder. The accused doesn't flinch. His tunic is soaked through with sweat, and his feet are stained with the red dirt of the prison yard. According to the crowd, he was caught taking goods from the storehouses of his Kalpuli again. Corn, beans, copper knives, nothing fancy, but enough to show he'd ignored previous punishments. He'd even served time as a public cleaner. But the stealing didn't stop. Historians still argue whether this form of punishment was always carried out with surgical precision, or if it sometimes veered into the realm of theatrical brutality. Some say only the tip of the nose was taken, enough to leave a scar but preserve function. Others believe full removal cartilage and all was common, especially in the case of noble offenders who should have known better. The priest raises a ceremonial knife, not obsidian this time, but a flattened blade of polished flint, gleaming ominously. The man breathes in, slow and shallow. The assistant steps in close, steadies the prisoner, and with a smooth, practiced gesture, it's done. A brief motion. A flash of blood. The man stumbles but remains silent. Another assistant steps forward, pressing a paste of herbs and ash to the wound, wrapping it in a clean strip of cotton. The ceremony ends almost before it begins, and then comes the walk. The man is led around the square, flanked by 2 guards. His head is uncovered now, his face visible, altered, unmistakable. The crowd doesn't jeer. This isn't a public stoning. It's closer to a silent civic announcement. This man has broken faith with the community, and now, every time someone sees his face, they'll know. You flinch, not from gore, but from the sheer weight of the symbolism. In Aztec culture, the face was sacred, a reflection of one's soul and honor. To permanently alter it was to mark someone spiritually as well as physically. Losing a nose wasn't just a cosmetic issue, It was a banishment from full personhood. And it didn't stop there. Once punished, the noseless individual often lost additional rights such as the ability to represent their family in legal matters or to lead ceremonies. In some cases, they were branded with additional glyphs on their arms or shoulders. The punishment followed them not just through their life, but into memory. You drift toward the back of the crowd and overhear someone whispering a fringe tale about a former noble who faked his own punishment to avoid disgrace. Supposedly, he wore a wax prosthetic and lived for years under a different name. It sounds made up. But then again, you've already seen shaved heads, painted drunkards, and people buried in mud today. What's one more mask among many? As the marked man disappears down a side street, the plaza exhales. Vendors return to setting up their stalls. A child runs after a ball of twine. Life resumes. But everyone has seen, and they will remember. You pass a small shrine on your way out, a crude stone face, broken and missing its nose. Not a coincidence. You remember that in Aztec myth, facial disfigurement often signaled cosmic imbalance or divine punishment. Some scholars suggest that nose cutting may have been partially inspired by such myths, transforming human law into miniature reenactments of divine justice. And yet, you feel the throb of modern squeamishness. Permanent mutilation feels excessive, extreme. But here, in this world, it makes brutal sense. The Aztecs weren't just punishing the flesh, they were protecting the spirit of the collective. If your greed endangered the whole had a right to scar you in return. You find yourself touching your own nose, perhaps more often than necessary, as you head toward the edge of the plaza. The air feels different now. Like the city's patience is thinning, like you've crept deeper into the harsh honesty of Aztec order. But don't worry. As long as you're not pocketing corn or defiling shrines, you should be safe, for now. You make your way beyond the temple square, following a stone path that winds along the canal where paddle boats drift lazily in the late afternoon light. The air smells of water and wildflowers, sweet and serene, until you hear the sound of wood hitting flesh. Repeated, rhythmic, calm, even. And when you round the corner, you find a group of men kneeling in a circle, backs bent, shirts stripped off. A priest stands in the center, holding a thin, flat paddle. It's not chaos. It's not rage. It's justice, Aztec style for domestic disorder. You've stumbled into what's called the ritual flogging, a punishment reserved not for thieves or drunks, but for people who cause turmoil in their own households. Today's accused? Men who refuse to support their aging parents. In a society built around family and clan honor, this was considered not just selfish, but cosmically ungrateful. The gods gave you life through your ancestors. To ignore your elders was to spit in the face of the divine. And that's how you end up half-naked, kneeling in a public garden, getting your dignity gently but firmly paddled away. The priest raises the paddle again and delivers another blow, not vicious, but hard enough to echo across the water. The man grunts softly, then bows his head lower. No one restrains him. He doesn't resist, because this is about acceptance, correction. It's the Aztec version of say it with your chest, except you're saying it with your back. Historians still argue whether these public floggings were always voluntary. Some records describe people willingly submitting themselves for punishment to restore community trust. Others suggest that those who refused were shunned until they relented. Either way, the result was the same. Your pride got stripped, your body got welted, and your role in society was spiritually rebooted. You glance to the side and notice a small clay dish with herbs and resin, slowly smoking. That's copal, the same incense burned in temples. It's here now not just for aroma, but to purify the space. Pain, in the Aztec worldview, wasn't inherently bad. If directed properly, it cleansed, balanced, even healed. That's why these men aren't crying out. They're atoning, not just for bad behavior, but for failing their role in the cosmic food chain. A fringe anecdote from a mountain village claims some men even requested extra lashes if they believed they'd brought shame to their kalpuli. It wasn't about masochism. It was about honor-proving you were serious, sincere, and ready to change. You watch as the priest finishes with one man, then walks calmly to the next. A young man, no older than 20, lifts his chin slightly and waits. You hear murmurs that he struck his grandmother during an argument over inheritance. Not severely, but enough that the entire neighborhood demanded action. Now, under the open sky, he receives a slower, more deliberate series of blows. Everyone knows what he did. Everyone knows he's paying for it. It's uncomfortable. Not because it's violent, because it's so quiet, so structured. Punishment here isn't about rage or revenge, it's about recalibration. These people believe the universe is a wheel. If one spoke breaks, the wheel won't turn. So they fix it with wood, with sweat, with public admission. When the floggings end, the men don't rush away. They sit in the grass, shoulders raw, breathing deeply. Some begin to chant softly simple verses, invoking forgiveness, familial healing, and humility. Children stand nearby, watching with wide eyes. One mother pulls her son closer and whispers something in his ear, probably something like, "Don't forget who raised you." And then, in one of those moments that remind you why this empire was anything but simple, a small feast begins. The same elders who ordered the punishment bring bowls of maize, gruel, roasted squash, and beans. The flogged men eat in silence, side by side with their judges. Because once you've paid your due, you're welcome at the table again. You sit quietly, watching steam rise from the food, trying not to stare at the welts drying on bare backs. The man who hit his grandmother winces as he reaches for a tamale. An older woman, maybe the grandmother herself, gives him an extra helping without saying a word. This isn't forgiveness, not yet. But it's the first spoonful of something like it. As the sun lowers, casting golden glints on the canal, you begin to understand. The Aztec world wasn't lawless or cruel, it was deeply, obsessively structured. Even their punishments had protocols, rhythms, rituals. The gods didn't demand perfection, but they demanded effort. And sometimes, effort looked like 20 lashes followed by quiet tamales. You rise slowly and make your way down a narrower path, flanked by tall reeds swaying in the breeze. The sound of paddles fades behind you. The scent of copal lingers like a ghost hug. Ahead, the lights of Tenochtitlan twinkle between rooftops and rising smoke, and you can't help but think maybe pain doesn't always break people. Maybe sometimes it's the stitching thread that pulls a cracked household back together. Just maybe be nice to your parents, especially if there's a paddle involved. You follow the reed-lined path until it curls toward a quieter courtyard, shaded by a grove of ahuehute trees, with bark like wrinkled old faces. A few birds trill lazily overhead, their song oddly soothing for a place that's about to showcase one of the Aztec Empire's stranger legal statements. Because here, tucked behind temple walls and community kitchens, you're about to witness what happens when lying isn't just a bad habit, it's a crime punishable by mouth modification. You arrive just as a young man, barely old enough to grow a mustache, is being escorted into the plaza. He's not bound, not crying, but the guilt clings to him like sweat. The gathered elders murmur as he kneels before a low stone platform decorated with carved mouths open, scowling, some missing tongues entirely. A not-so-subtle preview of what's to come. The boy's offense? Public slander. He accused a respected neighbor of poisoning his doga dog that, according to witnesses, was perfectly fine and probably just ate too many tamales. His accusations led to a 3-day quarrel that shut down a local marketplace. The gods hate chaos, and the elders hate markets that can't move maize. So, here he is, One of the guards steps forward with a small ceremonial tool, a slender cactus thorn tied to a twig handle. You feel your own lips twitch nervously. The boy doesn't move, as the thorn is raised just, braces his jaw. With a single, swift motion, it's done. The skin above his upper lip is pierced, not deep, but enough to draw blood and create a tiny hole. Then, a thin strip of reed is inserted through it. The reed wobbles slightly as he exhales. No screaming. Just a sharp inhale. A wet blink. A reed through the lip. You see, the Aztecs had a concept known as tlazali, meaning filth, corruption, disorder. Lies, gossip, and slander were considered verbal filth. So, if your words polluted the community, your mouth became the site of purification. A hole, a reed, a visual reminder. This is someone who talks too much and too poorly. Historians still argue whether these mouth piercings were symbolic or functional. Some codices suggest the reed had to remain in place for several days. Others propose that the piercing wasn't about pain or permanence, but visibility. Everyone could now see that you had spoken falsely. In essence, your reputation was walking around ahead of you, like a neon sign blinking, untrustworthy. A fringe tale you overheard from an old fishmonger says that one man, after receiving his reed mouth punishment, embraced it too fully. He painted the reed gold and became a sort of anti-gossip bard, performing dramatic reenactments of his slanderous crimes in the central market. Whether he was rehabilitated or just really committed to irony is lost to time. Back in the courtyard, the boy is now sitting silently in a shaded alcove while the community files past. No one says anything, but everyone looks, a few nod. One older woman pats him on the shoulder, as if to say, "You're young, you'll recover. Just stop accusing people's pets of witchcraft." And this wasn't the only punishment for misusing your mouth. Chronic liars might have their tongues pricked with maguey thorns. Repeat offenders could be forced to chew bitter roots that caused numbness and nausea, symbolically souring the ability to speak. If you were really persistent, the council might sentence you to carry a clay jar on your back with a glyph for verbal poison, painted on itan, a specially dramatic punishment that turned you into a walking warning. You glance at the boy. He's still quiet. Maybe too quiet. But that's the point. In Aztec society, silence wasn't always weakness. Sometimes it was wisdom. Sometimes it was survival. A breeze picks up and rustles the carved mouths on the stone platform, as if the sculptures themselves are whispering. You imagine what it would feel like to walk through your town with a reed dangling from your lip, each word you speak tugging against it slightly, reminding you of what got you there. And just like that, you talk a little less. The ritual ends without much ceremony. The boy is handed a simple corn cake and a bowl of Adderley warm, bland, and comforting. He eats slowly, alone. One priest approaches and crouches beside him, murmuring something low and gentle. Maybe an invitation to join the scribes. Maybe a reminder that everyone deserves a second chance, even big mouths with pierced lips. As you step away, a group of children begins reenacting the punishment with stalks of grass and exaggerated yelps of imaginary pain. Their laughter is soft, almost apologetic. They know the lesson, and they'll remember. You turn down a side path lined with painted tiles, each showing scenes of speech and silence, councilmen debating, parents correcting, children listening. Here, language is a tool, a gift, a sacred act. And when misused, it's not the gods who lash out. It's the community. Quietly, artistically, with one small hole that speaks volumes. So the next time you open your mouth to spill someone else's secrets, maybe pause. Maybe imagine a reed. Maybe say nothing at all. You wander beyond the courtyard of pierced lips and cautionary whispers, trailing behind a group of women carrying bundles of herbs and gourds, their footsteps soft on the worn stone. The sun has begun to dip lower, casting everything in that golden, sleepy hue that makes even punishment seem poetic. For a moment, it almost feels peaceful, until you hear its stomach rumble loud enough to echo through the market. Not yours. Not yet. But belonging to a man kneeling near a public shrine, surrounded by bowls of untouched food. His eyes are sunken, his limbs trembling faintly. You've entered the territory of a punishment that strikes from within. Starvation. The man is dressed in plain white cotton, stiff with wear, and thin enough to show every ridge of bone beneath it. Around his neck hangs a token carved from obsidian marked, with a glyph that means something like excessive mouth or lying belly, depending on your translation. You're told he's on his 6th day of fasting, a sentence not of physical restraint, but spiritual purification. His crime? Greed? Not theft, not corruption, just sheer, stubborn, unrepentant greed. He'd been caught hoarding food during a festival meant for communal sharing bags of cacao, salted fish, maize, all hidden behind false walls in his storehouse, while his neighbors scraped together dried pumpkin seeds. The elders called it not just selfish, but spiritually rotten. So now, the food surrounds him, but he may not eat. That's the cruelty of it, the proximity. The Aztecs believed that hunger wasn't just a symptom of poverty. It could be a ritual tool, wielded as punishment for imbalance. To deny food to someone who denied generosity was to turn their body into a moral lesson. And unlike flogging or chilly smoke, starvation didn't end quickly. It lingered. Like guilt. Like regret. Historians still argue whether fasting punishments were imposed more frequently on nobles or commoners. Some suggest that nobles, who had more access to food, were more likely to be punished through denial of it. Others believe fasting was used selectively, reserved for those crimes that disrupted the sacred rhythm of giving and receiving. Either way, it was always visible, always slow. You move closer and catch the man's gaze. He doesn't speak. His lips are dry, his throat working with effort. A priest approaches and offers him a bowl of water not to drink, but to pour over his hands in ritual cleansing. He does so, shakily, then returns to stillness. Behind him, the untouched food begins to draw flies. It's not just about the hunger. It's about what it means. This punishment lazot laminilistly, the act of self-denial was meant to humble the soul. And in many cases, the fast didn't end until the offender gave something away, a stored good, a valuable possession, or even a symbolic confession. Only then could they be fed again. Hunger as incentive. Starvation as spiritual pressure. Nearby, a woman begins setting up a public table. It's a small offering station. Tamales, beans, little corn dolls. Her voice carries as she explains to her children why the man is there, not as a monster, but as a lesson. Her youngest son asks if the man is dying. She says, not if his heart opens first. A fringe account passed among merchant apprentices tells of a trader who once refused to share surplus food during a famine. His punishment wasn't mere fasting but ritual feeding of others. For an entire month, he had to cook and serve meals at the temple kitchens, forbidden to eat anything himself until all others had been fed. Whether myth or truth, it reinforces the message. Food isn't just sustenance, it's a social bond. Break it, and the gods take notice. The man's 7th day begins with ceremony. A drum beats slowly at dawn. A priest approaches with a piece of paper amaranthused in religious offerings. He holds it to the man's lips and asks, "Will you give?" The man whispers. It's hard to hear, but the priest nods. Moments later, 2 boys are sent to his home to retrieve his hidden stores. What remains of his hoarded goods will be redistributed, some to the poor, some to the temples. In return, the man receives a single bowl of thin maize gruel, eaten in slow, reverent mouthfuls, not because it tastes good, but because it means survival. You sit nearby, watching the sunrise reflect in the bowl's surface. The man doesn't smile, doesn't weep. He just chews quietly, as if each bite is a promise. To never take too much. To never hoard what should be shared. In the Aztec worldview, hunger had teeth. It wasn't just a punishment, it was a moral ecosystem. Everyone had a duty to feed and be fed. And when that balance was disrupted, it wasn't enough to scold. The offender had to feel that imbalance in their gut. Literally. You rise to leave as temple attendants begin clearing away the offerings, wiping down surfaces with leaves soaked in scented water. The courtyard smells of earth and corn and something faintly sour, maybe humility, maybe human frailty. You look back one last time at the man, who now lies curled on a woven mat, eyes closed, body slack with exhaustion. He survived the worst of it. But the hunger will linger. It always does. And as your own stomach growls in sympathy, you silently vow to never skip the communal potluck. Not in this city. You leave behind the echo of that slow, reverent chewing, and slip into the shaded arcades of the crafts district, where obsidian blades glint behind stalls and feathered cloaks hang like frozen birds. The scent of dye and crushed flowers clings to the breeze. For a moment, things feel almost festive. You catch sight of two young boys racing past, one wearing a jaguar mask too big for his head, the other holding a whistle shaped like a skull. They vanish around the corner, and that's when you hear it, the unmistakable sound of a child crying. Not a tantrum, not a scraped knee sob. This is the cry of someone caught, someone in trouble. And when you follow the sound, it leads you to a small square, where a boy, no older than 10, stands on a low platform, arms folded defiantly, nose dripping, lower lip trembling but holding firm. Two elders face him, unimpressed. In his hand, a small wooden toy that, apparently, he did not make or buy. You're about to witness one of the Aztec Empire's more unusual corrections. Child punishment by public stillness. No beatings, no cages, no shouts, just stillness, and the ever-watchful gaze of everyone who walks by. The elders declare the verdict quickly. The boy was caught stealing from a craftsman's stall just. A carved whistle, small, probably worthless. But stealing is stealing, even when you're 3 feet tall and missing a few teeth. The child is placed on a square mat in the center of the plaza. He must stand still. He may not speak. He may not move. For 3 hours. In silence. With that ridiculous whistle still clutched in his hand like a guilty trophy. You glance around and realize this is an event. People don't gather to mock him, but they do gather. They walk slowly past, murmuring lessons to their own children. A merchant shakes her head. A teenager smirks and gets elbowed by her father. Somewhere in the background, a priest makes a note on a palm leaf scroll. Historians still argue whether child punishment in the Aztec Empire was more symbolic than severe. Some sources suggest children were treated harshly to build discipline early. Others point to the use of shame, symbolism, and endurance over brute force. The truth, like most things here, probably lives in between. Children were expected to be better, and if they weren't, they were shaped like clay with pressure, heat, and a great deal of public display. A fringe story whispered among older craftsmen tells of a girl who kept stealing dyes to color her dolls. After her 4th offense, she was dressed in a sack made of rough Maggie fibers and made to sit at the edge of the market for a full day, holding a sign that read, "My dolls are colorful, but my soul is plain." Whether that sign existed or not, the message was clear. If you can't follow the rules, you will become the lesson. Back in the square, the boy's legs begin to tremble slightly. He shifts his weight, but the elder priest watching him gives a sharp cough, and he freezes again. 2 hours left. It's a long time when you're 10, an eternity when you're humiliated. But something else happens too. A young girl, maybe a sister or neighbor, approaches slowly with a cup of water, and sets it gently beside the mat. She doesn't say anything. Neither does he. But the gesture lands. His shoulders drop slightly. His face softens, still punished, but not abandoned. You notice now that others have brought small tokens bundles of sage, a necklace of seeds, even a brightly painted ball, not gifts, symbols. These offerings surround the child like a little ring of community intent. We're watching, but we haven't written you off. Because that's the thing. In the Aztec mind, even children could disrupt cosmic balance, but they could also restore it if guided correctly. Punishment wasn't about crushing them. It was about molding, them turning that stolen whistle into a lifelong lesson that rang louder than any toy ever could. As the hours pass, the sun climbs and then begins to fall. The boy still stands, though now he leans slightly, barely keeping upright. His eyes water, his nose runs, but he doesn't speak. And when the priest finally nods, he collapses not dramatically, just like a small sack of bones that's finally been allowed to exhale. They lift him gently, offer him more water, and return the whistle to the craftsman with a formal bow. The boy doesn't get it back, but he also doesn't cry. He walks off slowly, shoulders squared, dust clinging to his legs. Reformed? Maybe. Humbled? Absolutely. You sit on the edge of the square for a while longer, watching the breeze kick leaves across the now empty mat. A dog trots past, sniffing curiously at the abandoned cup. A man nearby whispers to his son, "Steal, and you stand." The boy nods solemnly, hand tucked tightly into his father's. You smile faintly, not at the punishment, but at the strange gentleness of it. No scars, no lashes, just the quiet weight of stillness. In a world of blood and blades and chilly smoke, there's something oddly hopeful about that. You rise and stretch. A group of children race by again, this time avoiding the mat completely. They've learned something today. Maybe you have too. Even in an empire of warriors, stillness can be the sharpest correction. You leave behind the echoes of stillness and stroll through a narrower street where the walls lean close and painted symbols mark every home. Glyphs of jaguars, ears of corn, coiled serpents family emblems, badges of pride. And as you admire the artistry, you hear an odd sound. Not drums, not crying, but laughter, nervous, contained. And from the sharp tone of the elder's voice nearby, not the good kind of laughter. Rounding the corner, you find a young man standing ankle-deep in a trough of what looks suspiciously like spoiled maize porridge. He's wearing a tunic turned backward, and his arms are bound not tightly, but awkwardly tied in a way that forces him to shuffle like an overconfident penguin. Nearby, a trio of women chuckles behind their shawls, while a scribe takes notes with a long charcoal stick. This is no punishment of violence. This is mockery ceremonial, pointed, and, if you're being honest, kind of hilarious. You've stumbled upon the public humiliation punishment known informally as the Fool's Procession, reserved for arrogance, boasting, and worst of all, false claims of nobility. And this young man? He bragged about being descended from a prestigious warrior clan. Claimed his grandfather rode into battle with obsidian blades strapped to his elbows. Told anyone who'd listen that he was practically half god. One problem: he wasn't, not even a quarter god. Turns out his family worked with dye vats, not war clubs. When the elders discovered the Leafter, a suspiciously detailed retelling of a jaguar duel that never happened, they didn't send him to the whipping post. They sent him here, to be paraded like a fool through the city's heart, dressed in misaligned robes and smeared in ochre and soot. Historians still argue whether these punishments were fully ritualized or if they evolved locally, invented on the spot by creative councils. Some regions preferred a donkey mask. Others forced liars to wear gourds for shoes. But the core was the same. False pride needed visible deflation. The young man stumbles forward as a thin reed flute announces his arrival. Children nearby are encouraged to point and laugh not cruelly, but knowingly. One boy tosses a flower at his feet. Another mimics his stiff gait, arms flapping. An older woman calls out, "Where's your jaguar, great warrior?" He keeps walking. His humiliation is poetic. The trough of spoiled maize, for example, isn't random. In the Aztec worldview, maize was life. Spoiled maize, on the other hand, represented wasted potential. To wade through it barefoot was to admit you'd soiled your own reputation. The backward tunic, a symbol of reversed truth, and the tied arms, meant to stop the proud from gesturing wildly as they told stories that weren't theirs to tell. A fringe account, recorded by a post-conquest friar, describes a similar punishment in which a man who lied about winning a ritual ball game was forced to bounce a gourd instead of a ball, while children watched and recited his lie like a nursery rhyme. Was it true? Maybe not, but it matches the rhythm of what you see here. Punishment as performance, truth enforced through creative spectacle. You follow the procession as it turns toward the market square, where more people have gathered. Some clap slowly, sarcastically. Others mutter that they'd suspected all along he was more mud than blood. And yet, you don't sense cruelty. There's no violence, just exposure. Bright, unbearable exposure. And this is key. In Aztec culture, your name, lineage, and deeds were not just yours, they belonged to your community. To falsely elevate yourself was to steal honor from others. You weren't just a liar, you were a thief of legacy. So naturally, you were corrected where it hurt most, your pride. The young man finally reaches the far side of the square, where a priest and a council elder wait. They say nothing, simply hand him a brush and a bucket of water. He kneels and begins scrubbing the soot from his legs, the maize from his sandals, the shame from his skin. It won't come off all at once. And that's the point. The punishment ends when the bucket is empty. Not before. Not a moment sooner. You linger a bit, watching him scrub as people drift away, satisfied that balance has been restored. You overhear one woman mutter, "Now maybe he'll stop talking about his imaginary eagle cloak." Another adds, "Or at least stop wearing feathers to funerals." The tone is dry, but not hateful. They want him humbled, not destroyed. As twilight folds itself into the city, the square empties, leaving only the faint outline of maize sludge in the dust and a few discarded flowers. The young man finishes scrubbing, sets down the bucket, and bows not grandly, but deeply. Then he turns and walks home, not backward, but Keter. You trace your steps back through the street of painted glyphs, every emblem now feeling a little heavier with meaning. Here, identity isn't flexible, it's earned, protected. And if you lie about who you are, the city will set you straight with laughter, with soot, and with just enough spectacle to make sure it sticks. You reach the corner where the boys with the jaguar mask passed earlier. They're gone now, but their laughter remains, like soft echoes in the stone. And you make a mental note. If you ever time travel back here, keep your family history honest. Or at least bring an extra tunic. You walk on, leaving behind the sludge-slick footprints of pride, punished, and enter a quieter, more reverent part of the city. The precinct of scribes, students, and sacred record-keepers. The stone paths narrow into corridors of painted walls and etched codices, where every step echoes like you're tiptoeing across history itself. But don't get too comfortable, because just beyond the calm hum of education lies a punishment reserved for a particular breed of disappointment, the lazy student. You hear it before you see it sharp, hollow claps like wooden blocks, striking rhythmically against flesh. No screams, just a steady beat and the occasional gasp. You round a carved archway and come upon the courtyard of a comicac, the elite school for noble children. And there, kneeling in orderly rows, are half a dozen boys wrapped in stiff cotton tunics, backs bare, their arms outstretched. Behind each one stands an instructor holding a thin, flat paddle carved with glyphs of discipline. 1 stroke per infraction, 1 stroke per failure. 1 stroke for every time they slacked off during ritual recitation or pretended not to understand how maize is counted in the sacred calendar. You might think this seems harsh for students, especially considering their youth, but this was the Comicac, and it wasn't just school. It was training for priesthood, for leadership, for navigating the terrifying bureaucracy of gods and calendars. If you messed up here, you weren't just failing a test, you were failing the empire. The punishment today is specific. The boys skipped sunrise prayers 3 mornings in a row, claimed they overslept, blamed the rainy season, maybe even each other. But in Aztec culture, the gods didn't hit snooze, and neither should you. Hence, wooden paddles across young backs. Historians still argue whether this form of discipline was meant more for spiritual purification or just practical correction. Some scholars suggest it symbolized driving out laziness, a metaphysical cleansing. Others believe it was simply the most effective way to keep high-strung adolescents focused in a school where failure meant being sent to sweep temple stairs for the next 10 years. You step back slightly as the next boy receives his strokes. He flinches but doesn't cry. None of them do. They've been trained not to. Not because they're unfeeling, but because endurance here is a virtue. To rise to power, one must first master humility. And nothing brings humility like the rhythmic sting of ritual discipline in front of your peers and mentors. And yet, even this ceremony has its gentler side. A fringe tale whispered by older scribes says that if a boy endured his punishment without complaint, his name was quietly noted and marked for future promotion. A kind of secret honor badge made of silence and red skin. No one ever confirmed it, but more than one student left the courtyard with a bruised back and a suspiciously proud glint in their eye. You glance over and see an older priest, ink-stained fingers clasped behind his back, nodding slowly as he watches. Not with joy, but with assurance. He believes this works, that a paddled student becomes a careful scribe. A careful scribe becomes a wise advisor, and a wise advisor keeps the empire running for another season. But not all students were from noble families. Farther down the path, near the Telpocalathi School for Commoner Boys, you find another punishment unfolding. A teenager, taller than the others and clearly full of misplaced confidence, stands barefoot in a ring of jagged pebbles. He winces with every shift of weight. His crime? Disrespecting an elder during recitation, laughing during a war god invocation, and trying to pass off another student's work as his own. Copying homework, Aztec edition. Here, the punishment is designed for longer-term discomfort. No blows, just sustained pain. A ring of small stones heated by the sun, meant to burn away pride. He stands there until the instructor says he's learned humility. It might be an hour. It might be until his calves shake and his mouth goes dry. But the lesson will stick, quite literally, in the soles of his feet. You observe quietly as a group of younger students gathers nearby, sitting cross-legged, watching their classmates suffer. Not to gloat, but to learn. In the Aztec world, every punishment doubled as instruction. The offender's pain was everyone's curriculum. Later, when his time is up, he limps to a basin of water, washes his feet, and bows deeply not just to his teacher, but to the earth, because even the ground plays a part in discipline here. A fringe account mentions that some boys who failed repeatedly were sent to live with older temple sweepers for a moon cycle. Not punished violently, but worked to exhaustion. They rose before dawn, scrubbed altars, carried water, chopped firewood, then repeated it all again. And if they survived the month, They were welcomed back not with applause, but with a bowl of maize gruel and a chance to try again. That's how second chances worked. You earned them with sore arms and blistered hands. As the sun begins to slide behind the western peaks, the courtyard empties. The boys file out, backs aching, feet sore, eyes downcast but focused. You catch one of them murmuring a prayer to Quetzalcoatl as he walks, a promise to do better, or maybe a quiet curse against sun-heated stones. Either way, it's honest. You trail behind them, your steps slow, your mind buzzing. In this empire, education isn't soft, but it's sacred. And punishment here isn't cruelty, it's continuity. These boys will grow into the priests and judges who decide the fates of others, and so they must first know what it feels like to carry the weight of their own missteps. You round a final corner and pause before a stone etched with hundreds of glyphs, records of students, their deeds, their corrections. No names, just symbols, a paddle, a pebble, a pair of bare feet. You touch the stone lightly and smile. You would have made a terrible Aztec student. You continue along the carved stone path, the school walls fading behind you as the city shifts tone once more. There's a hush in the air, a narrowing of space, like the city itself is holding its breath. You follow the gentle slope of a trail that leads to one of the empire's less talked about corners, quiet, fragrant, lined with flowering shrubs and baskets of feathers, honey, and bones. This is the Weaver's District, yes, but also something else, something subtler, more slippery. Because here, where art and devotion intertwine, is where the punishments get personal. And the crime? Adultery. Now, don't panic. This isn't going where your guilty conscience thinks it is. Well, not entirely. You arrive at a shaded clearing where two women sit side by side on woven mats, hands folded, eyes down. No chains, no shouting, no torches, just quiet, watchful, waiting. Around them, a ring of community elders, a few cloth merchants, and most interestingly, a priest wearing a mantle embroidered with tiny frogs. You're not sure what that means yet, but you have a feeling you're about to find out. One of the women, older, cheek sunken, has been caught in what the records call inappropriate familiarity with a married nobleman. The other, younger and visibly shaking, is the wife. The punishment here isn't flogging or exile. It's more intricate, more emotional. It's public Wavinga ritual designed to bind, shame, and resolve all at once. Each woman is handed a spindle and a length of cotton thread dyed red. They are instructed to weave a small square no bigger than the palm of a hand while reciting a set of verses honoring Xochiquetzal, the goddess of beauty, love, and yes, temptation. You watch as their fingers move awkwardly, each motion punctuated by murmured words. This is penitence through thread. Historians still argue whether this kind of punishment was widespread or unique to artisan communities. Some claim it emerged from textile guilds as a way to handle scandal internally without escalating to capital consequences. Others suggest it reflected deeper social dynamics where emotional betrayal was stitched back into harmony, one thread at a time. Fringe accounts from coastal towns tell of weaving duels, where two accused parties raced to finish identical patterns, and the one who completed it first was considered to have shown greater remorse. The loser? Required to gift the finished cloth to the family of the wronged. You can imagine the passive-aggressive embroidery. Here in Tenochtitlan, though, this punishment is less theatrical and more methodical. The idea is simple. If your actions created a tear in the social fabric, you must mend it, physically and symbolically. The square being woven will be placed in the market, its uneven lines and clumsy knots displayed for all to see, a silent confession in cotton. But there's more. When the weaving is finished, the younger woman, the wife, is offered the right to choose what happens next. She may forgive, and the offending woman must serve her household for 3 moons. Or she may reject, and the woman is banished from the district. marked with a glyph on her wrist, identifying her as disharmonious. Today, she chooses the former. With a voice steady and low, she says, 3 moons, then gone. There is no applause, no cheering, just nods, acceptance, a few quiet sighs. And the priest in the frog mantle steps forward, holding out a bowl of pulped maize and herbs. Each woman dips their fingers into it and touches the edge of their weaving. A seal, a mark, a promise. You step back, a little awed, a little unsettled. In many societies, punishments for adultery are sharp and final. Here, they are slow and public, designed to expose the roots, not just chop the branches. Because to the Aztecs, betrayal wasn't just about desire, it was about balance. Disrupt that, and you owed more than an apology. You owed restoration. Nearby, a man dressed in an apprentice's cloak kneels beside a basin of water. Rumor is, he too was punished for seduction not by force, but by vanity. He spent too long admiring himself, chasing affection where none was offered. His punishment? A month in silence, required to serve in the women's dye house, forbidden to speak unless addressed directly. A humbling task for a man once known for his boasts. As you walk through the fragrant garden paths, past drying cloth and sunlit patios, you catch bits of whispered conversation. A girl asks her mother why the woman is weaving. The mother replies simply, "Because hearts leave stains." And you realize this is justice woven like a tapestry. Each mistake becomes a thread, each thread part of a pattern. Not always pretty, not always clean, but honest. You leave the district as the sun begins to dim, casting long shadows across the thread-strewn patios. One of the punishment cloths flutters in the breeze, catching the light just so. You can almost read it like a sentence. I was wrong. I hurt someone. I'm mending what I broke. No need for shouting. No need for blood. Just a story and string. You step beyond the garden of stained hearts and enter a narrow street lined with low shrines and bowls of offerings flowers, beans, small carvings of skulls, smiling with far too many teeth. This district hums with a different energy. It's quieter, yes, but not peaceful. Not really. It's the quiet of waiting, of someone holding their breath just before consequences land. And you're about to witness a punishment so strange, so oddly specific, it borders on performance art. The ceremonial mud burial. No, not dead. Not even close. The accused here are very much alive. In fact, you spot them immediately, 3 men up to their necks in wet, lumpy earth, their faces smeared with streaks of yellow pigment, brows furrowed not with pain but embarrassment. Their arms are pinned beneath the muck. Their heads poke out like vegetables in a particularly judgmental garden. You lean close enough to hear the elder priest explaining their crime to a ring of onlookers. They mocked the sacred. 3 times, apparently. During 3 separate ceremonies, once by laughing during a maize blessing, once by imitating the chants of a priest, and once this one drew Gatsby sneaking into a festival dressed as a god and dancing for coin. Oh, the audacity. So now, they're being reabsorbed by the earth. Not buried forever. Just long enough. The Aztecs believed the earth itself, Tlaltecutli, had a mouth. And when you mocked what came from the sky, you needed to spend time inside the one who held the ground. It's symbolic, humbling, and honestly, a little itchy. Historians still argue whether mud burials were widespread or limited to temple precincts. Some claim it began as a theatrical warning used for children or minor offenders. Others argue it originated from older agricultural rituals meant to shame those who disrespected nature. Either way, it became a public punishment that said, without a single word, "You got too high, come back down." Fringe stories from mountain towns tell of particularly mouthy teenagers being buried up to their shoulders during the dry season, left to sweat and reflect while their grandmothers sang dirges about humility nearby. If true, that might explain why Aztec adolescents were remarkably respectful around altars. You watch now as one of the buried men shifts slightly, and mud sloshes around his face. The priest steps forward and places a small bowl of incense on the man's head, not to burn, just to balance. "Let your thoughts be light," he intones. "You joked about the gods, now carry a cloud." It's hard not to chuckle at that, which probably wasn't the point. The punishment isn't endless. Most mud burials last from dawn until the sun reaches its peak. At that point, the accused are pulled free not with scorn, but care. They're taken to a ritual bathhouse where they're scrubbed with herbs and washed with river water. They're then required to offer gifts to the very gods they mocked: beads, feathers, food, or even personal items of value. One man today offers a finely carved comb. Another gives up a copper ring. The third, visibly reluctant, hands over a small flute that probably brought him more than a few coins. The priest accepts these silently, placing them in a basket with all the reverence of someone collecting overdue library books from the divine. You notice something else. This punishment draws a different kind of crowd. Not jeering, not mocking, more reflective, because everyone, at some point, has laughed when they shouldn't have. Everyone has made a joke too sharp, too loud, too soon, and in this world, the gods hear everything. One woman beside you mutters to her child, "Even the wind repeats your words." The child nods, eyes wide. After the men are pulled free, attendants carefully wash their feet and legs with warm water infused with marigold. Not a spa treatment, a cleansing. The pigment on their faces is wiped away with leaves, leaving pale streaks in the mud-slick skin beneath. And then comes the strange part. Each man is handed a clay mask, split down the middle. One side is smooth and serene. The other side is cracked, with exaggerated laughter lines. They're instructed to wear them for the rest of the day, as a visual reminder. Joy and mockery are not the same. The world can hold laughter, but only if it knows where to aim it. You follow the trio as they shuffle toward the outer plaza, masks secured, faces blank behind the symbols. Children gawk. Elders nod. And someone begins drumming softly, not a war beat, but a rhythm like water dripping from a leaf. The city accepts their apology. The gods, hopefully, do too. There's a kind of beauty in this punishment through dirt and silence, through itchy legs and symbolic masks. It's not about breaking people. It's about pressing them down just far enough to feel the weight of what they mocked. You find a bench near a shaded corner, where a basket of unused clay masks rests. One is shaped like a turtle. One has tears painted where the eyes should be. One is just blank. You run your fingers over the surface and wonder, which would they have given you? You shake the thought away and rise, brushing dust from your clothes. The city beckons forward, into another lesson, waiting beneath the sun. And as you go, you step carefully around a patch of churned mud, still warm, still soft. You don't want to sink, after all. You step over the last stretch of damp earth, squishier than you'd like, and make your way into a broad, open plaza, where the light hits hard and shadows stretch long like warning fingers. There's something different in the air, hairless ritual smoke, more tension. This is the sort of place where reputations get roasted over slow coals. And sure enough, right in the middle of it all is a man standing on a raised platform with a massive wooden disc strapped to his back. No, it's not decorative. No, he's not a statue. He's the subject of one of the Aztec Empire's more curious and dramatic punishments, the burden disc. He shifts slightly, the weight pulling his shoulders down. The disc, probably 2 feet across, is painted with symbols of maize, beans, and feathers, a visual map of the things he's supposedly stolen or mismanaged. Because this is the punishment for wastefulness and misallocation, particularly among lower administrators. You don't just get called out, you get decorated like a walking chart of your failures. And no, you don't get to stop walking. The punishment is a kind of mobile confession. You're required to parade the main square with the disc on your back for a full day, pausing at assigned corners where you must kneel, bow your head, and announce to onlookers exactly what you did wrong. The man does so now. I kept the best cacao. I gave spoiled beans to the people. I lied about the count of feathers. He pauses. The crowd watches. Then he shuffles on. Historians still argue whether these public recitations were written for the offenders or improvised. Some believe priests provided pre-approved scripts. Others suggest the humiliation was more potent when the words were their own. What's agreed upon, though, is the weight literal and symbolic. That disc was made of heavy wood, deliberately awkward to carry, its painted accusations bright enough to be read from across the square. You follow him as he moves to the next station, where a scribe waits to record his posture, his timing, his tone. If he appears insincere, the punishment continues into the next day. One false smirk, and he's walking again tomorrow. There's no shortcut through this shame. It's not just the walking or the weight, it's the social exposure. Everyone in the city now knows not only what he did, but what he's wearing. For weeks afterward, people will remember the colors, the shapes, the glyphs. Oh, you mean the feather hoarder with the lopsided disc? And that's the point. The Aztecs didn't believe in forgetting. They believed in balance. If your misdeeds unbalanced others, then your punishment should lodge in public memory. A fringe account from a rural Kalpuli tells of a merchant who added water to his pulque to stretch it for profit. He was made to carry a disc with painted jugs on it, each one cracked, dripping blue pigment down his back. During his walk, he was followed by children with actual leaking pots. The symbolism hit hard. So did the smell. You pause as the current offender reaches his final station, the central altar of the market square. Here, he's required to kneel and press his forehead to the stone while a priest lightly taps the edge of the disc with a ceremonial staff. This is known as tekpan, nemilistli, the shame balance. It marks the symbolic end of the punishment. The man remains in that position for 20 heartbeats, long enough for the community to absorb the lesson, short enough to leave his legs tingling. Then, the disc is unstrapped. He's helped to his feet, and he's not dismissed with jeers or glares, but with silence, which is somehow worse. You watch as he walks away slowly, leaving behind a shallow groove in the dust. The disc is set acid, not destroyed. It will be repainted and used again. Recycled guilt. And that's the beauty of it, if you can call it that. These punishments aren't designed to end you. They're designed to mark you, temporarily, and then allow you back into the fold. The man's crimes won't be forgotten. But now they're part of a public record, and the community can decide whether he's changed. It's less, you're canceled, and more, you're on probation, with a splash of theatrical flair. You move deeper into the plaza, past vendors selling tortillas, tamales, and roasted insects, their conversations hushed in the wake of the procession. A boy mimics the man's walk with a flat basket strapped to his back, pretending to confess to eating too many sweets. His mother rolls her eyes and swats him with a rolled-up tortilla. There's a strange humor in it all. A warmth beneath the embarrassment. Because while the Aztecs could be severe, they also understood rhythm, spectacle, community. They knew that shame wasn't always a scar. Sometimes it was a story, and stories could be rewritten. At the edge of the square, you find a stone bench shaped like a jaguar with its eyes closed. You sit, watch the wind move through the stalls, listen to the drumbeat of sandals on stone. The disc lies nearby, now blank again, a circle waiting for the next lesson to carry. And you think, not for the first time today, thank goodness you're just visiting. You leave the memory of that clumsy wooden disc behind, still hearing the shuffle of feet and the soft whimper of pride leaking out under public scrutiny. The path curves now, leading toward the edge of a residential district, quieter and strangely sweet-smelling. You pass rows of neatly kept gardens, and every few steps there's a bundle of flowers tied to a doorway or a bowl of honey and tamales left for the ancestors. But that's not why you're here, not this time. You followed the scent of punishment specifically, a punishment that involves bees. You spot them before you hear them. Two boys, standing stiff as reeds beneath a hanging frame, draped in heavy cloth and woven netting. Their arms are stretched outward, each gripping a painted rod that rests across their shoulders like a yoke, and swarming nearby, buzzing in anxious loops around them, are bees, dozens, maybe more. Their hum is low, steady, and strangely judgmental. This punishment isn't just painful, it's poetic. You've stumbled across the rarely administered, exquisitely specific sentence known as Melipona chastisement. For those unfamiliar, the Melipona are stingless bees used by the Aztecs for honey sacred, thick, and sometimes used in rituals. But if you tamper with the hive, if you steal from the offerings, or worse, if you mock the bees during ceremonies, the punishment comes from the bees themselves. The boys' brothers, from what you gather, were caught sneaking into a shrine garden during a moon ritual. They weren't there to pray. They were trying to impress their friends by climbing trees, shouting at the bees, and throwing rocks at one of the sacred hives. Now, the hive has been moved, and so have they, into position. The priest in charge wears a robe stitched with little spiral symbolic of the bee's flight. He steps forward and opens a jar of honey, placing it on a nearby stone. The bees respond. Slowly, ominously, they begin to land not in swarms, but in pairs, and trios on the boys' arms, necks, and faces. Stingless, yes, but not harmless. Their little feet tickle. Their wings buzz right at your eardrums, and their message is clear: respect us next time. Historians still argue whether this punishment had any real religious weight, or was just a beautifully ironic form of payback. Some suggest it emerged from communities where bee cultivation held sacred status, meaning any insult was treated as blasphemy. Others think it's more of a fringe case, a weird one-off that just stuck around because it was so delightfully specific. A fringe account from a mountain village describes a similar event. A young man who mocked a honey priest during a naming ritual was tied to a post and painted with crushed flowers, then left near a hive overnight. No one knows if he repented or just developed a lifelong fear of buzzing. Either way, the bees got the last word. Back in the garden, the boys are trembling, not dramatically, just with that tight, miserable stillness of someone who desperately wants to sneeze, but knows it might trigger 100 tiny ticklish feet into full-on dance mode. Their eyes are wide, lips pressed shut, and you can almost read the regret pouring from their pores. One priest walks past, trailing incense, murmuring a prayer that roughly translates to, "Let foolishness become wisdom." Each boy must remain still until a small candle burns out. Not a thick temple candle, mind you, just a slender stick of wax, enough to last maybe 30 minutes. A full half-hour of standing like a honey-drizzled statue while the bees circle land and investigate your sins with the curiosity of tiny, fuzzy prosecutors. Eventually, the wick sputters. Smoke coils up. The priest claps once, sharply. Attendants gently shoo the bees away, guiding them back to their hives with soft fans made of turkey feathers. The boys are untied and led to a basin of scented water, where they wash their hands, faces, and necks. One boy sobs more out of relief than anything. The other mutters something about never going near a hive again. His brother nods like he's already sworn off flowers forever. But it doesn't end there. Each boy is handed a beeswax figure shaped like a spiral and told to carry it for a full day, placing it in every shrine they pass, a gesture of apology to the community and to the bees. You follow them as they begin this procession, moving from house to house, shrine to shrine, depositing the little spirals with the same reverence usually reserved for royalty. The lesson, you think, has landed. You linger near one of the hives for a while after they've gone. The bees are back to work, humming in satisfaction, their world unbothered by human theatrics. You wonder if they recognize the apology. If they care, maybe they do. Or maybe, like the gods, they just like to be respected. As you leave the district, a girl skips past you holding a honeycomb wrapped in leaves. She stops, glances up at you, and says, "Don't laugh at the bees. They tell stories." You nod solemnly. You've heard one of them now. You move carefully now, every buzzing echo still fresh in your ears, as though a bee might suddenly emerge from the folds of your tunic and demand an apology. But the hives are behind you, and the scent of honey gives way to something heavier metallic, smoky, faintly medicinal. You're entering a neighborhood near the city's perimeter, close to the workshops of obsidian cutters and bone carvers. The air here carries sharpness, not just in smell, but in spirit. And today, it carries something else too. A punishment, so ancient, so performative. It dances right on the edge of what even this empire considers theatrical, the painted exile. You reach a stone circle where two men kneel in silence, each surrounded by attendants holding pots of thick black and white paint. One man is old, thin as a fishing pole, his back stooped and his hair streaked with ash. The other is young, red-eyed, with a jaw clenched so tight you can hear his teeth grinding. They've been accused of the same offense, betrayal of a sacred oath. And before you assume something dramatic like breaking into a temple or desecrating a relic, no. This. Sometimes, the oaths were smaller. One man was a healer who promised never to charge more than a handful of cacao beans for a bloodletting treatment. The other? A trader who swore to never barter foreign copper for local obsidian without declaring it first. Small rules, big meaning, especially when broken in public. The punishment is not a beating, not a fine, not even jail. It's this. They are to be painted from head to toe in symbolic patterns and cast out of the city for one moon. Not banished forever, but made unrecognizable. Their skin becomes a message, a warning. Their identities stripped, overwritten with shame, and sent wandering. The painters begin their work. The elder man is marked with a wide white stripe down the center of his face, flanked by black sunbursts signifying broken healing. The younger man receives the opposite, a black band from ear to ear, bisecting his eyes, with spirals climbing up his arms. The symbol for deception. Even the soles of their feet are painted, which seems rude, given how far they're about to walk. Historians still argue whether painted exile was always accompanied by formal judgment or if community councils could order it independently. Some claim the punishment was mostly reserved for oathbreakers in specific profession: shealers, traders, record keepers. Others argue it was a flexible sentence used when harsher measures were deemed too final. A fringe record from the lake towns describes a painted exile who was forgiven mid-punishment. This family met him at the city edge and washed off the symbols with lake water, welcoming him back before the moon cycle ended. Whether this was permitted or a rogue act of compassion is still debated. Back in the circle, the painting ends. The two men are stood up, clothed in simple woven wraps, dyed pale graith color of twilight, not day or night. Each is handed a pack containing food for 5 days, a bone flute for signaling, in case of danger or surrender, and a small net bag holding one unpainted river stone, a token of their past identity, one they'll only reclaim if forgiven later. The priest overseeing the punishment steps forward and reads aloud their names, not as they are now, but as they were. Then, solemnly, he says, "That name is not yours today. The names are recorded on a scroll, alongside the painted patterns, so they're not forgotten, just paused." Then, the city gate opens. It's not dramatic. There's no music, no shouting. Just the sound of sandals scraping dust as the two painted men walk slowly toward the road that leads out of the capital. People gather to watch. Not mockingly, just watching. Like a funeral procession, but without the death. Just a shedding. And here's where it gets strange. As they walk, people whisper to them. Not insults but advice. Hints. Old blessings. A woman calls out, "Drink from the third river, not the first." A boy tosses a small pouch of dried beans into one man's bag. Another offers a folded strip of cloth, blue with a yellow border the colors of forgiveness. These gestures aren't meant to erase the punishment, just to soften it, to say, "We remember what you were. Come back different." You trail them for a while, just to the edge of the fields where the road forks. A guard stops them, checks their packs, then presses a hand to their shoulders. Not rough, not gentle, just final. And then, they're gone. The city gate closes. The watchers disperse. And 2 bowls of river water are poured out at the threshold, washing away the painted footprints. You turn back, the image burned into your mind. 2 men, painted in shame, walking into uncertainty. Not forever, but far enough to feel it. The Aztecs didn't always punish with pain. Sometimes, they punished with distance. And a reminder that identity isn't just yours. It's loaned to you by the community. Betray that loan, and you walk until your name finds its way home again. As you pass the paint pots, one still warm, you catch your reflection in the sheen of black pigment. You imagine the stripe they'd give you. You leave behind the echo of footsteps fading into exile and wander deeper into the city's spine, where the air thickens with incense and old stories. Columns rise like fossilized trees on either side of you, their surfaces etched with serpents, stars, and unfamiliar constellations of guilt. This is the judicial heart of Tenochtitlan Tecpan, where wrongdoings are weighed not just against law, but against the stars themselves. Because here, under the watchful eyes of both human scribes and divine calendars, punishment gets bureaucratic and poetic, and occasionally, downright weird. Today's trial isn't for theft or pride or adultery. It's for lateness. Chronic, disrespectful, cosmic-level lateness. You duck into a crowded plaza and spot the accused right away, a courier, still wearing the fringed ankle wraps of his station, standing sheepishly beneath a wooden scaffold covered in yellow paint and feather tassels. His posture screams, "Yes, I know. I was late again." But his expression leans more toward disbelief, as if he can't quite accept that he's about to be punished for what, in his mind, was probably just traffic. But to the Aztecs, lateness isn't about personal inconvenience. It's about disrupting harmony. The universe runs on time. Sunrises, solstices, maize planting, moon rituals, the whole divine clockwork. If you throw off the timing, you aren't just rude, you're dangerous, especially if your job is to carry messages from the temple to the fields or from the market to the palace. This guy's last-minute delivery meant a critical blessing arrived after the sacrifice had already ended. Not ideal. Very undivine. So today, he's being tried in the most ceremonial way possible, through reenactment. His punishment is the hour-wheel relay. The priest overseeing the trial explains it to the crowd like it's a halftime show. The accused must now carry a replica of the sacred sunwheel, large, circular frame wrapped in colored cords around the plaza, stopping at 8 marked stations. At each station, he must recite a verse from the Tono Pahuali, the sacred 260-day calendar, then perform a gesture to honor the gods of that station's day sign. And he has to do it all on time. If he's even a breath late between stations, the run starts over. Historians still argue whether this style of punishment ritualized repetition was reserved for calendar offenses or also applied to messengers who lied, took bribes, or just dawdled. Some suggest the idea of symbolic restitution through performance was deeply tied to Aztec cosmology. Others think it's more bureaucratic than spiritual just, a really elaborate way to say, "Don't be late again." A fringe record tucked away in a colonial codex mentions a man who was perpetually tardy to temple fire-lighting duties. His punishment? Made to follow a torchbearer silently through the city for 7 days, holding an unlit stick and never speaking. His nickname afterward? Cold Flame. Back in the plaza, the accused begins his first lap. The crowd hums with anticipation. The first station is marked by a painted jaguar claw. He bows, recites, makes a clawing gesture. On time, he runs to the next, a maize stalk. Bows, recites, mimes planting. Still on time. The third station trips him up, fumbles the verse, confuses the god of wind with the god of rain, and stutters. The priest taps a small gong. Start over. The crowd groans. You settle into a shady spot near a food vendor, chewing a roasted chile pepper while the courier runs lap after lap, sweat turning his cotton tunic transparent. He doesn't complain, doesn't argue, just runs, chants, performs. Again and again. Because in this empire, you're not punished in isolation. You're punished in public, where every eye reminds you that time matters. That rhythm matters. That if the gods can keep to a schedule, so can you. Finally, on the 6th laugh gets it. 8 stations, 8 perfect verses, 8 well-timed gestures, no gong. The crowd claps, not mockingly, but genuinely. He's passed the test. And now, the closing rite. He kneels in the plaza's center, lays down the hour wheel, and offers a single cacao bean to the sun disk painted on the ground. It's not much, but it's symbolic. He gives time back to the gods, bean by bean. Then comes the weirdest part. He's handed a small clay figurine, shaped like a turtle, with a clock glyph painted on its shell. He must carry this figurine for 13 days. If asked why, he must tell the story. Every time. No shortcuts. I was late. I ran the wheel. I gave the time back. It's not just for him. It's for everyone who hears it. You follow him a bit as he limps through the alleyway, the turtle tucked in his belt sash, its shell still damp with paint. No one mocks him. One older man even nods and mutters, "Let the sun beat you once, not twice." A proverb, maybe, or just practical advice. You leave the judicial plaza behind, marveling not at the severity of the punishment, but its style. The Aztecs didn't do bland. Even their justice system was performance art. Painful, yes. Humbling, absolutely. But always designed to echo, like a drumbeat, like the tick of an invisible clock. You wonder what time it is, and whether the gods noticed you checking your wrist just now. You drift now into the lower districts, where cobbled alleys twist like lazy snakes between vendors, hawking gourds, reed baskets, and steaming tamales filled with whatever someone found near a lake that morning. A man offers you a frog the size of your face, claiming it sings. You decline, gently. You've seen too many frogs today. Down here, punishment doesn't look like pain. It looks like awkwardness, like inconvenience, like the Aztec equivalent of being made to wear a sign that says, "Yes, I did the thing, please ask me about it." Welcome to the world of symbolic inversion, a punishment for hypocrisy and social deception, and arguably, one of the most creative arrows in the empire's quiver of consequences. The plaza you enter is modest, rimmed by low walls and simple stone seats, and yet the energy is unmistakably festive. Musicians play flutes and drums, but they're offbeat deliberately. It sounds like someone dropped a marching band into a wind tunnel. A woman walks past with her shawl inside out. A boy spins in slow, confused circles, balancing a basket of fruit on his head. What's going on here isn't a market or a performance, it's a sentence. The central figure is a man wearing the robe of a priest but backward. His sandals are mismatched. His head is half-shaved, half-braided. And worst of all, he's smiling the kind of tired, sheepish grin that says, "I deserve this." This is the punishment for hypocrisy specifically, for teaching public virtue while privately indulging in, shall we say, recreational misdeeds. You listen in. Turns out, he had been giving impassioned sermons on the importance of temperance, humility, and moderation, while secretly arranging nighttime feasts with illegal pulque and smuggled chocolate from the coastal markets. No one was harmed. No blood was spilled. But the betrayal? That sticks. So now, his punishment is inversion. For 13 days, everything he does must be done backward, symbolically or literally. His robe faces the wrong way. His bed is made on the wrong end. His name is spoken in reverse order. And in public, he must carry a basket filled with empty food wrappers and bones, a visible reminder that his appetite contradicted his sermons. Historians still argue whether this kind of symbolic inversion was reserved for moral leaders, or whether everyday citizens could be subjected to it. Some claim it stemmed from earlier festival traditions like Tlakaxapahualizatli, the flaying ritual where symbolic reversal was part of rebirth. Others believe this style of punishment evolved as urban bureaucracy grew more suspicious of spiritual fraud. A fringe account describes a weaver who praised thriftiness in front of the market council, then used communal funds to buy imported feathers for her hair. Her punishment? For 10 days, she had to dress in mismatched tunics and explain to anyone who asked that she wasted what was not hers. And yes, one scholar claims she made it fashion. Back in the plaza, the priest turned hypocrite kneels to offer incense. But instead of a blessing bowl, he places it into a pile of dirt. Symbolic misalignment. The smoke curls sideways. The crowd watches with an odd mix of amusement and respect. Everyone here knows hypocrisy stings more when shown, not shouted at. He rises, hoists his basket of leftovers, and begins a slow walk through the district, pausing at shrines and public gathering spots. At each stop, he must read a verse from his own previous teachings, word for word, then offer a confession that contradicts it. Temperance is the root of strength, he says at one corner. Unless, of course, you're invited to the feast of Governor Hewson, and forget how many cups of pulque you're holding. He's funny, embarrassed, vulnerable. The crowd eats it up not cruelly, but with a sense of collective correction. He is one of them. He failed them, and now he's admitting it without being whipped, branded, or locked away. The Aztecs, for all their blood and fire, had a soft spot for poetic justice, especially when it was public, instructive, and lightly absurd. You follow as he reaches a final altar, shaped like a Froga callback, you guess, to the weird night feast that started it all. He places the basket of scraps at its base, bows low, and says, "Let the gods digest what I could not." The crowd claps once, in unison. The sentence is done. But here's the twist. After his 13 days of reversal, the priest will return to his duties not shunned, not disgraced, but with new respect, because he endured the same standards he once preached. And in a world where honor is currency, that earns you back a few feathers. As you watch him walk away, now barefoot and robe still backward, you realize the genius of it. Punishment doesn't always need pain. Sometimes it just needs mirrors. Show someone what they were, then ask them if they like the view. You linger by the frog altar, watching as a child flips her sandals around and walks backward as a joke. Her mother laughs, then whispers, "Only if you lie, little one." A lesson passed down, and a warning wrapped in a smile. You step back into the main path, the sounds of the inverted plaza fading behind you. Somewhere ahead, the drums of war punishments are beginning to thump. But for now, you savor the gentle absurdity of this punishment, where your sins chase you backwards through your own words. And you try to remember which way your own sandals are facing. You follow the beat now low, slow, rhythmic as it thuds through the stonework like the pulse of the city itself. The air grows heavier, not smoky or spicy this time, but solemn. You're approaching a training compound reserved for the Telposh Calathi youth warrior houses. And in this realm, punishment takes on a sharp edge, honed by tradition and pride. Because here, to fail is not just to stumble, it's to dishonor your lineage, your instructors, and even the gods of war themselves. And someone has failed. You arrive just in time to witness the start of a warrior's public correction. A boy, maybe 16, maybe 17, with the lean, still-growing look of someone whose voice probably changed last week's, kneeling on a wide platform covered in sand. His upper body is bare, his hands tied loosely in front of him, and his face wears that brittle expression that says, "I'm not crying, you're crying." The crowd of cadets, instructors, and temple guardians gathers quietly. No jeers, no mockery. Just intense, undivided attention. The boy's offense? Cowardice. Or more specifically, breaking formation during a ceremonial mock battle and fleeing his assigned post. Not in a real war, but during a ritual drill. Still, that matters here. Because if you flinch in the shadow of ritual, what happens when obsidian blades are flying? And so the punishment begins. The sand stance. He's required to kneel in a sunlit arena, arms held out to his sides in a T shape, palms flat, while holding 2 bowls of fine, dry sand. If he drops even a grain just one, he starts again. The challenge isn't physical. Not really. It's mental. Stillness under pressure. Endurance. Without spectacle. It's designed to mimic the discipline expected on the battlefield. No movement, no distraction, no fear. Historians still argue whether this practice dates back to early Toltec warrior schools, or if it was refined during Tenochtitlan's rise. Some think it was inspired by jaguar rituals where stillness was a hunting virtue. Others suggest it was practical. A cheap, repeatable punishment that didn't scar the body but reshaped the mind. A fringe account from a lakeside warrior camp describes a similar tradition, but with balance instead of stillness. Offending youths were made to stand atop narrow poles for hours, reciting chants about loyalty while balancing bowls of water on their heads. Anyone who spilled had to begin anew, under supervision of a very bored jaguar knight. Back in the arena, the boy's arms tremble. He breathes through clenched teeth. Sweat beads at his hairline and trickles down his spine, threatening to tickle, distract, break him. But he holds. And as the sun climbs, so does the difficulty. This isn't meant to destroy. It's meant to forge. One instructor walks a slow circle around him, softly repeating an old warrior mantra. The enemy waits for your blink. Another. An elder with white paint streaked across his cheeks sprinkles cactus pollen on the sand below the boy's knees. Reminder that pain, here, is part of the purification. After what feels like an eternity, possibly a quarter hour, possibly a lifetime, the priest overseeing the right steps forward inspects the bowls and nods once. Not a single grain lost. The boy bows his head, trembling now with released tension, not shame. An assistant takes the bowls. The crowd remains silent. And then, one by one, the cadets step forward and drop a pinch of their own sand into a common jar. A ritual of forgiveness, a collective restoration. But it's not over yet. The boy is given a ceremonial club not sharpened, just ceremonial, and tasked with striking a tree post exactly 13 times, each strike representing a day he'll spend in self-imposed exile from drills. It's not punishment exactly. It's reflection, a time to relearn his breath, his stance, his courage. Each strike echoes through the compound like a drumbeat. Steady, heavy, earnest. By the 13th, his breathing has steadied. His posture has returned. He steps back, bows to the instructors, and is dismissed not as a disgrace, but as someone who faltered, then stood again. And that, to the Aztecs, mattered most. You linger as the cadets gather the sand bowl, carry the forgiveness jar back to the temple, and light incense that smells of pine and sun-baked stone. An instructor sharpens a wooden club with rhythmic focus, pausing only to mutter, "He'll be stronger next time." You believe it. Because here, punishment isn't just about retribution, it's about training. The body is clay, the spirit is heat. You don't burn away the weak, you shape it. As you walk away, past rows of spears and racks of ceremonial shields, you glance once more at the boy now seated beneath a fig tree, sipping water and staring at his knees. He doesn't look broken, just Keter. Resolved. You think maybe we should all spend a little more time holding metaphorical sand bowls and a little less time running from uncomfortable drills. You leave the sand-scarred training ground behind, the rhythmic thud of ceremonial clubs still echoing in your ears like distant thunder. But where you're headed now, the rituals turn theatrical again, dipping into the uncanny. Because tonight, yes, the sky is shifting into that bruised purple just before dusk. You're approaching one of the most surreal corners of the Aztec world, the Court of Echoes. And if the name sounds dramatic, that's because it is. This is where certain liars, deceivers, and storytellers with creative memories come to atone, not with blood or sweat, but with performance. You arrive at a crescent-shaped plaza, ringed by stone pillars and decorated with painted gourd masks hanging from ropes. Each mask represents a lie, told in public, some benign, some devastating. The plaza is filled with people, mostly quiet, many seated, their attention fixed on a low wooden platform where tonight's punishment is about to unfold. The accused is already there, a young woman in a ceremonial sash, clearly once a temple singer. Her crime? Repeating false visions as prophecy. Whether she meant to deceive or simply enjoyed the attention, well, that's what today's rite hopes to clarify. Her punishment is called the mirror mockery. She will reenact her false prophecy publicly, in full costume, with exaggerated gestures, while surrounded by 4 masked attendants who echo everything she says sarcastically, mockingly, in distorted sing-song voices. Think of it as a court-ordered parody of her own deception. It begins. She steps forward, holding a clay bowl filled with marigold petals, and utters, with heavy drama, "The gods weep blood upon the rooftops." From the corners, 4 masked figures echo back. "The gods weep blood on the roof." The crowd chuckles. A child giggles. The woman's cheeks flush pink. Each line she delivers from her original vision is returned to her like a mirror in a funhouse, distorted, silly, humiliating. She must continue, no matter how absurd. If she pauses, hesitates, or attempts to argue, the punishment restarts the next evening. It's not physical pain, it's mental. Embarrassment, reflected at her with ceremony and flair. Historians still argue whether this type of punishment was sanctioned by high priests or devised at the community level. Some claim it originated in the markets, where false criers would be exposed through mocking chants. Others argue it was rooted in ancient dramatic traditions, blurring the line between justice and theater. A fringe record describes a man who claimed to see omens in maize husks. When proven false, he was made to host a public harvest of lies, where each corncob he unwrapped on stage had a painted face and a written confession. One said, "I lied for love." Another, "I just like attention." Back on the platform, the woman powers through her last line. "And the moon shall vanish in a river of blood." The echoes return with melodramatic sobs and one of the masked attendants miming a swoon. The crowd howls. But then complete silence. The woman bows deeply. She reaches into the marigold bowl and scatters the petals across the stage, a symbolic surrender of falsehood. Then she kneels, bows her head, and places her hands behind her back. The masked figures circle her once, twice. Then they remove their masks and press their foreheads to the stone in front of her, a ritual gesture of restored balance. And just like that, it's over. The community responds not with cheering, but with gentle applause. The kind that says, "We see you. You're human. Don't do it again." She's helped to her feet, handed a fresh tunic, and led through the crowd. People step aside, offering respectful nods. Because despite the parody, this wasn't cruel. It was a reset. And in Aztec justice, the difference between humiliation and healing is always intention. You linger near the gourd masks hanging from the plaza ropes, each one painted with a different expression. Wide eyes, pursed lips, twisted smiles. One is cracked down the middle. Another has been sewn shut with thread. Each mask is a story told and retold, some believed, some not, all remembered. As twilight deepens, a group of young singers begin a slow, harmonic chant, soft and eerie, drifting through the columns like smoke. They sing of truth as a river and lies as painted boats, beautiful, buoyant, and always eventually sunk. You turn to leave, the sounds of the echoing mockery still bouncing gently in your head. It's oddly effective, this style of punishment. Because laughter, when used with precision, cuts deep, and in a society that holds words sacred, to misuse them isn't just foolish, it's dangerous. You pass a stone basin filled with ink and feathers, where scribes record the event in pictographs. A singing mouth, a flower, a twisted road, a broken mirror. Tonight, the story enters the archive, not as myth, but as lesson. You make your way down a dim path, past walls marked with sun symbols and speech scrolls. Somewhere ahead, someone's cooking maize cakes again, the smell pulling you gently forward. But you can't quite shake the image of the woman, her prophecy unraveled under the weight of her own echo. And maybe, just maybe, you start to watch your own words a little more carefully. You wander onward into the deep veins of the city, where the buildings lean closer and the alleys get narrower, until finally, even the air feels a little secretive. This is the quarter of the artisans, scribes, and dream keepers, people whose job it is to spin reality into objects and symbols. But just because you work with metaphors doesn't mean you're immune to punishment. And in this quarter, misdeeds get addressed with a very specific sentence, the trial of repetition. You stumble into it mid-act. A young manthan, ink-stained, clearly a scribus, seated cross-legged in a small stone circle. Before him lies a blank codex made of smooth deerskin. Surrounding him are 5 older scribes, each holding a copy of the same passage. It's not dramatic. It's not painful. It just looks exhausting. His crime? Subtle but serious. Falsifying temple records to boost the prestige of his own family. A little number change here, a strategically omitted failure there. The kind of quiet manipulation that snowballs into myth if left unchecked. So now, he must copy the correct version of the record exactly, flawlessly, 100 times, by hand, with a reed stylus dipped in natural dye that fades after 2 hours, forcing him to work continuously or risk losing everything he's done. He begins again each time the ink disappears. The punishment becomes not just physical strain but mental erosion, repetition, monotony, correction through drudgery. Historians still argue whether this practice originated from temple schools or was imported from elite family traditions. Some claim it was once a privilege used to teach discipline, not enforce it. Others see it as a cultural check against arrogance among intellectuals, who could do more damage with a single line of text than a thief with a dagger. A fringe codex found in a merchant archive tells of a noblewoman who altered harvest records to avoid a tax. Her sentence? Bake exactly 2,600 maize cakes and deliver them door to door, reciting the proper tax rate at every doorstep. Imagine explaining that to the neighbors. Back at the circle, the scribe's fingers cramp. He shakes them out, re-wets his stylus, and keeps going. A mistake just one, and the page is burned. No corrections, no mercy. The ash is collected in a bowl beside him, a visual reminder of imperfection. The scent of scorched hide hangs in the air, sharp and papery. He doesn't cry, doesn't plead. This isn't a whipping post or a pillory. It's worse. It's internal. And everyone watching knows that tomorrow, when the records are read aloud in temple court, it will be his corrected versions that get archived. But the shame of knowing what he tried to slip through will stay with him longer than any scar. As night falls, clay lanterns are lit around the circle. Their glow turns the codex silver. You spot a few young scribes watching with wide eyes, as if trying to memorize every detail not of the punishment, but of how not to end up here themselves. Because when words are sacred, misusing them is more than sloppy. It's sacrilege. The older scribes begin chanting softly, repeating the lines of the corrected passage in slow unison. It's hypnotic, a kind of incantation. 400 maize bundles were given to the temple of Huitzilopochtli, not 420. They repeat it 10 times. 20. You stop counting. The boy keeps writing, lips moving silently in time with the chant, hand aching but steady. It isn't cruelty. It's correction, Aztec style, relentless, tedious, ceremonial. Eventually, a scribe steps forward and holds up one of the boy's finished pages. He examines it carefully, then folds it, presses it to his forehead, and places it in a woven satchel. 1 down, 99 to go. The boy does not groan. He just lifts another sheet and begins again. You stay a while longer, watching the ink fade on his earlier pages like memories disappearing under time. It's poetic in its way, fitting, because lies too, disappearance exposed. And sometimes, the best apology is rewriting the truth over and over until it sticks. As you walk away, past murals of stylized jaguars and blooming speech glyphs, a young girl runs by, shouting numbers. 400, 420. Her brother chases her, laughing. You suspect neither of them really understands the story, but they'll remember the chant. And maybe that's the point. In this empire, punishment doesn't always come with bruises. Sometimes it comes in silence, repetition, and a stylus that scrapes your conscience raw. The echo of chanting scribes fades as you wander down a corridor of carved basalt, where each pillar hums softly in the breeze, like stone remembering a melody. The path grows steeper here, curving up toward the temple, terraces less bustling, more solemn. This district isn't built for trade or laughter. It's for sacrifice, prayer, and penance. And here, even the punishments feel older, more primal. Because now, you're entering the place of voluntary submission, the most Aztec of paradoxes, where people offer themselves for punishment before they're caught. At first glance, it seems impossible. Who willingly steps into a public square and says, "Hey, I lied about my tribute. Quota, please humble me now." But in a culture where spiritual balance is everything, unconfessed guilt is dangerous. Not just for the sinner, for everyone. A misaligned soul might tip the scales of a harvest, summon floods, invite disease. So sometimes, just sometimes, people came forward on their own, seeking ceremonial purification. You pass beneath a stone arch carved with serpents swallowing their own tails. Beyond it, in a courtyard shaded by white-draped awnings, a young woman sits cross-legged on a straw mat. Her head is bowed, and a circle of feathers surrounds her like a soft, ticklish prison. 2 priests, dressed in identical robes, the color of volcanic ash, stand silently nearby, watching for movement, breath, regret. This is Thlemictolesli, the feather stillness. Her offense? A minor one. If you're thinking like a modern tourist, She accepted a double portion of a ritual feast by claiming to be pregnant when she wasn't. But in a society where ritual meals are mathematical offerings to gods and ancestors, one extra tamale can unbalance everything. So here she sits, encircled by quetzal feathers, forbidden to move until the wind scatters one. When it does, she must rise, lift it, and speak her confession aloud. Some feathers stir, but not enough. She breathes carefully. You can practically hear her lungs counting each inhale. Historians still argue whether this rite evolved from earlier cleansing rituals or if it was a more symbolic alternative to harsher penalties. Some scholars believe it was designed to encourage self-correction, a kind of spiritual plea deal with the gods. Others think it may have had theatrical roots drawing crowds to reinforce moral behavior without shedding blood. A fringe account from a hilltop village tells of a man who confessed to hoarding salt during a drought. His penance? To carry a sack of ashes through the community, blessing each doorway while reciting, "Let bitterness be shared, not hidden." The town reportedly forgave him and got free salt. Back under the awning, a feather tumbles. Just one. It floats sideways, catches a breeze, and rolls to the edge of the circle. The woman opens her eyes. The crowd leans in. She reaches for the feather, stands slowly, and lifts it above her head. Her voice shakes, but the words are clear. "I took what was not offered. I made false room in my belly. I fed my hunger, not the gods." The priests step forward and remove the remaining feathers. One offers her a thin strand of magui fiber, twisted into a loop. She ties it around her wrist, a visible sign of her transgression and its cleansing. She must wear it for 13 days and avoid all ritual meals during that time, taking only water and basic maize cakes. But here's the part you didn't expect. After her confession, the crowd offers blessings. Small ones, a nod, a pinch of flower petals tossed gently at her feet, a whispered, "Tlatla Keotl," not shame, just the error. Acknowledged. Not erased, but seen. She bows, accepts the petals into her hands, and walks away. Not shunned, not whispered about, just lighter. You wander toward a raised altar, where similar loops of Maggie hang like delicate vines. Each one represents someone who confessed, accepted punishment, and returned. The fibers will decay naturally, breaking down into the soil beneath the temple. Their mistakes return to the earth. Humble compost for next season's balance. You sit on a warm stone bench nearby, surrounded by silent watchers, and the occasional priest murmuring over a bowl of incense. The scent is deep pine, charcoal, something citrusy, probably meant to cleanse the air, but it smells like memory. You close your eyes, just briefly, imagining what it would be like to walk into a circle of feathers and just wait. Wait for truth to arrive like a breeze. You crack one eye open just as a young boy steps onto the mat. He's barely 12, carrying a broken flute and a very guilty expression. The feathers are laid again. The wind picks up. The gods, it seems, are always ready to listen. And maybe, in a world where people offer themselves to truth before judgment comes calling, the real punishment isn't shame. It's silence, the waiting, the stillness. You rise from the bench, leaving behind the floating feathers and fading incense trails, and step out through the serpent gate, the looped vines brushing your shoulder like a gentle reminder. Maybe you didn't eat 2 tamales when no one was looking, but if you had, this is where you'd have ended up. Quiet, exposed, cleansed. You touch your wrist, just to make sure there's no Maggie fiber. Yet, you descend from the feather stillness court with a strange sort of calm clinging to your skin, like you've just bathed in someone else's regrets. But as the path curls downward through colonnades of obsidian and sandstone, the air tightens again, this time with ritual tension so thick you could slice it with a cactus spine. There's something heavier waiting below. Not metaphor, not performance. not repetition. This one is about pain. And not just any pain, ritualized endurance, designed not to punish in haste, but to instruct in agony. You've arrived at the Chikahwasli Riti, a physical ordeal, sometimes imposed on young warriors, who disobeyed direct orders during a campaign, or failed to protect an elder. Not every punishment had a spiritual overtone, but this one does, because pain, to the Aztecs, was never random. It was a bridge between the body and the gods, between failure and redemption. You enter a wide ceremonial courtyard with a low stone platform at the center. 4 young men stand at the corners, shirtless, eyes narrowed, each holding a different form of ceremonial instrument: reeds, rattles, drums, and the star of the show, a long wooden staff, notched with obsidian flakes and tipped with a polished curve. This, oddly enough, is the Kikahuastli, a kind of rattle staff normally used in agricultural ceremonies to summon rain or awaken seeds. But here, it's used in an entirely different way. The Acusetan adolescent with freshly cropped hair and a cracked lip kneels in the center of the circle, arms bound loosely behind him. His mistake? During a recent campaign exercise, he broke ranks and stole from a sacred field belonging to a neighboring village. Not the act of a bloodthirsty rebel, but still a violation of collective discipline and cosmic respect. So now, he'll receive 9 ceremonial strikes, each one administered with the Chikahwastli staff, not across the back or chest, but along the calves and soles of the feet. Because it's the feet that disrespected the land. It's the feet that must remember. Historians still argue whether this punishment was part of formal warrior codes or reserved for specific violations tied to earth rituals. Some see it as an evolved form of older rain-summoning rites that blurred into punitive practice. Others claim it originated from smaller farming clans, absorbed by the empire where stepping on sacred fields was the highest offense. A fringe account, preserved in a fragmentary codex, mentions a man punished not with strikes, but with dancing on maguey thorns while carrying the Chikahwastli, chanting apologies to the earth. Whether it worked is unclear, but it left quite the impression on his feet. Back in the courtyard, the first priest steps forward. He raises the staff, its obsidian tips glinting like insect eyes, and brings it down across the boy's right calf, not hard enough to maim, but enough to sting deep. A hush falls. The boy flinches, gasps, but doesn't cry out. The musicians respond with a rattle, then silence. Strike 2. Left calf. His leg jerks involuntarily. The priest chants a single word. Balance. Strike 3. Right foot, sole side. He hisses between his teeth. Another rattle, another word, memory, and so it continues. With each strike, a word. Land, lineage, discipline, shadow, return, rain. At the 9th, he bites his lip so hard he bleeds again. But he never collapses, never begs. The priests don't want collapse. They want stillness inside the storm. When it's over, he's helped to his feet, not with ceremony, just practically and guided to a shallow pool filled with cooled clay and ash. He steps in, wincing, and lets the mixture coat his feet. This isn't medical, it's ritual. The earth takes back the pain, the land forgives. Then, in perhaps the most symbolic gesture of the whole affair, he's handed a tiny obsidian pebble carved in the shape of a foot. He must wear it around his neck for 13 days, and each morning at dawn, place it on the ground and whisper an apology before walking for the day. A reminder that your feet carry more than your body, they carry your decisions. You watch him limp from the courtyard, his head lowered, but his jaw firm. It hurts, yes, but it means something. It teaches. In this world, pain is not just consequence. It's a kind of language. The body speaks it. The soul listens. And if you're lucky, you come out the other side not broken, but translated. As you prepare to leave, One of the musicians taps you gently with a rattle. You turn, confused, and he says, "Even seeds must break before they rise." Then he goes back to his rhythm. You pass a row of sandals lined neatly against the wall, belonging to the other boys watching the right. Each pair slightly different, some worn thin, others still new, all waiting to step onto the same path. And you wonder how many feet have learned their lesson in this courtyard, how many have walked away humbled, but stronger. You step onto the stone threshold, feeling the cool ground beneath your own feet, and just for a moment, you say nothing. Not a prayer, not a joke, just quiet acknowledgement. Because whether you're a thief, a liar, or a boy with quick feet and slower wisdom, the Aztecs had a message for you. Walk with care. The ground remembers. You follow the path through a dense corridor of carved serpent heads and painted murals, and you notice the city's rhythm shifting once again. No drums, no laughter, just quiet footsteps, hushed voices, and the soft flick of cotton banners in the wind. You've arrived at one of the most sensitive precincts of the Aztec world, where punishment doesn't involve public pain or theatrical embarrassment, but instead, the slow and invisible process of social unraveling. Welcome to the House of Shadows. It's not a real house. Of course, no four walls and a roof, but a ceremonial designation, a status, a sentence, for those who violate the bonds of kinship, loyalty, or ritual expectations, too sacred to be mocked and too subtle to be punished with fire or blood. These are the people who are not whipped, not exiled, not forced to dance on thorns. Instead, they are made to disappear. You arrive just in time to witness one such vanishing. A woman stands at the center of a public square, near the base of a temple terrace. She's not shackled or bleeding. She wears no mask or mark of shame, but she's surrounded by family members, brothers, aunts, cousins each, standing just a little too far away, each with eyes carefully averted. Her crime? It's whispered. She violated a long-standing family taboo, participated in a rival temple rite, while claiming devotion to her own lineage's god. A theological betrayal, not of the state, but of the blood. The punishment is social erasure, symbolic exile without travel. From this moment, she becomes non-existent within her kin group. No greetings, no offerings, no seating at festivals or market gatherings. If she speaks, no one answers. If she falls ill, no one treats her, not out of hatred, but out of solemn instruction. The family structure cannot be poisoned by divided loyalty. And so, for 13 moon cycles, she walks as a shadow present but unacknowledged. Historians still argue whether this sentence originated in rural clan traditions or evolved from priestly rules about purity. Some believe it was first used to deal with interlineage marriages seen as dangerous to sacred inheritance lines. Others think it may have emerged from tensions between rival cults within the same city precincts, essentially divine politics playing out through human silence. A fringe story from a mountain village tells of a man who worshipped a forbidden god of lightning during a drought. His punishment was subtle. The community refused to light his hearth fire. For a full year, he had to borrow flame from strangers or live in cold. Back in the square, a priest steps forward with a shallow clay bowl filled with red pigment. He dips a reed in the liquid and draws a single horizontal line across the woman's left shoulder blade. The mark is not permanent. It will fade. But until it does, it is a visible sign. She is not among us. Then, one by one, her relatives walk past her, each holding a flower, each dropping it into a basket without meeting her eyes. The flowers will be used in temple rituals over the next year, their petals symbolically removing her spirit from household shrines. And then, nothing. No closing ceremony, no public outburst. Just a gentle dispersal, like fog thinning at dawn. She remains in the square, alone, not crying, just hollowed out. You follow her later, from a distance. She walks the market perimeter, eyes lowered, hands tucked into her sash. When she approaches a fruit stand, the vendor looks past her, placing an extra guava on the table without a word. She takes it, leaves 2 cacao beans, and walks away. This, too, is part of the sentence. Everyone knows she's being punished, and so they participate quietly, respectfully, eerily. No one hurts her. No one touches her. But no one sees her, either. Not until her penance is complete and a formal reawakening ceremony is held. You stop at a temple mural showing the steps of such a ritual. A figure with no face, surrounded by silent birds, then slowly regaining features one by one. Eyes, mouth, ears, presence. There's something uncanny about it. A kind of punishment that doesn't teach through pain or shame, but through erasure. Through reminding someone that existence, in this world, is communal. You are because others say you are. And when they withdraw their words, you flicker like a candle in wind. The woman passes by you, and for a second, your instinct is to nod, to say something. But the hush around her is too deep, too wide. And even as an outsider, you know better than to break a ritual with casual kindness. You step aside. She does not glance at you. And when she's gone, you feel the weight of it, the cold breeze, of what it must be to walk as a ghost among the living. To be reminded that in this empire, silence is not absence. It's a verdict. You return slowly to the temple edge, past families lighting incense, laughing children, and flocks of white birds landing in courtyards to drink. Life continues, untroubled. That's part of the sentence, too. The world does not pause for one vanished voice. But someone is watching. A young girl, maybe 8, peeks from behind a column. Her eyes follow the woman. She doesn't speak, but you can tell she's thinking, what would I do? Would I speak? And maybe that's how it starts to end. Not with words, but with questions. The shadows stretch long now, curling like black ribbons across the baked stone underfoot. You climb gently toward one of the quieter temple terraces, where time moves differently, slower, softer, like a drumbeat heard from far away. The sky above deepens into ink, stars beginning to prick their way through. You're almost at the edge of the world, or at least at the threshold where punishment turns from action to reflection. Because this is the place of forgiveness rituals and of one final strange practice, punishing the gods themselves. You didn't miss here. Here, in this hushed and sacred spot, the Aztecs occasionally enacted ceremonies in which the gods were symbolically reprimanded. Not blasphemy, not rebellion, something more complicated. A kind of cosmic conversation. When crops failed, or plagues arrived, or omens darkened the horizon, and it seemed like the divine balance had broken, the people would sometimes scold the gods not violently, not with curses, but with formality, ceremony, and sometimes eerie tenderness. You reach the temple platform and find a semicircle of priests, each holding a small clay effigy. Each figure represents a deity: Tlaloc, god of rain; Tezcatlipoca, god of fate; even gentle Xochiquetzal, goddess of beauty. The effigies are painted in detail, adorned with feathers, bits of corn, woven sashes, but also marked with tiny red dots along their eyes or mouth saw, sign that tonight they are the ones being corrected. In the center of the circle stands a girl of about 13. Her voice is steady, her face solemn, and in her hand is a thin reed staff capped with a white blossom. She is tonight's Nahuatl reciter, a role given only to those who have shown perfect memory and impeccable conduct. Her job? To speak the grievances of the people, aloud, to the gods. She begins. Tlaloc, we begged, we sang, we burned copal, and still the rain came not. She taps the effigy once, gently. Tezcatlipoca, You clouded the hearts of fathers and made them cruel to their sons. Another tap. Nochequetzal, you turned away when beauty became envy, when lovers fell to grief. The reed staff does not strike. It touches. One by one, each god is named. Each is corrected. It's not punishment in the usual sense. It's ritual accountability. Because if people are to suffer for their sins, then the gods whose moods and trials shape the world must also listen, be reminded, be nudged back into alignment. Historians still argue whether this practice was widespread or symbolic, performed only in times of collective crisis or in hidden temple precincts. Some believe it echoes earlier Toltec beliefs, in which deities were considered companions more than masters capable of both kindness and error. Others claim it served as a release valve, allowing grief and rage to be expressed without collapsing the divine order. A fringe account, preserved in a badly burned codex, describes a rite in which a wooden idol of Tezcatlipoca was banished from the temple. For one moon cycle, after a series of disasters, it was carried through the city in silence, then left at the edge of the lake until the next rain. Did the rains return because of the scolding, or despite it? Scholars still bicker. Back at the circle, the girl finishes the litany. She bows, places the reed staff at the foot of Huitzilopochtli's effigy, and steps back. Then, the forgiveness begins. Each effigy is lifted and kissed on the forehead by a priest. Soft songs rise, gentle lullabies, offerings of renewal. The message is clear. We scolded you because we love you, because we need you, because if we stop talking to you, even in anger, we disappear. The clay figures are placed in a bed of petals, and over them is poured a thin stream of chocolateric, dark, sweetened with honey, a symbolic reoffering, a treat, a peace gesture. You sit at the temple's edge, watching stars multiply overhead. The priests wrap their effigies in blankets and carry them back to their altars. The girl is given a necklace of jade and a pinch of glowing dust, probably ground mica, catching the torchlight like stardust. She does not smile, but her eyes shimmer. And suddenly, it makes sense. In a world where punishment is everywhere etched into stone, chanted in the market, danced through thorns, this might be the most radical act of all. To forgive, to say, even to the gods, you failed us, but we're still here. You lean back against warm stone and breathe in the scent of crushed flowers and flickering copal. The night has softened, pulled its cloak tighter. The city below hums faintly, a lullaby of sandals and whispers. You think of the woman walking erased, the boy struck for stepping on sacred soil, the scribe writing the same sentence over and over again. And now, the gods, gently reminded by a child with a reed and a blossom. Punishment here isn't always power. Sometimes it's care disguised as consequence. A balance maintained not through violence, but through ritual nudging, symbolic theater, and the endless dance between misstep and forgiveness. You close your eyes. The wind touches your cheek like a palm, and somewhere in the darkness, you think you hear a god apologize. The city sleeps now, or at least pretends to. Torches still glow from niches in temple walls, and somewhere in the far distance, a flute sings a melody that sounds like water remembering a fall. You linger near the edge of the sacred district, where punishment no longer looks like consequence, it looks like reflection, like ritual closing. You've made it through blood, feathers, laughter, lies, echoes, ink, silence, and shame. But the Aztecs, in all their complexity, understood something modern minds often forget. Even justice needs a final breath. Tonight is that breath. You arrive at the Tlahtoli Stonea, smooth, circular platform, surrounded by windflowers and guarded by statues of gods whose names you no longer try to pronounce. This is where confessors of the confessors come, priests, judges, and enforcers of punishment, who have borne witness to centuries of sin and sorrow. They come here not to punish or be punished, but to unburden, because in this empire, even the executioner must be cleansed. A man kneels at the center. Older, robed in simple cotton dyed the blue of dawn. His hands rest on his thighs. His eyes are closed. Before him lies a single jade shard, shaped like a tongue. That's not poetic. It's literal. A symbol of speech, of truth, of the power to name, and the burden that power brings. He begins to speak, not loudly, not dramatically, just slowly, one memory at a time. I sentenced a girl who stole fruit for her brother. I made her balance maze on her head until she wept. I saw a boy dance on thorns, who had only broken a ceremonial cup. I held silence when a nobleman bought his way out of a lie. Each confession lands like a stone in water rippleless on the surface, but sinking deep. He doesn't ask for forgiveness. He doesn't cry. He just offers what he's seen, because someone must remember. And remembering, in this place, is sacred. Around him, others kneel, priests in training, elder judges, former warriors, each holding their own jade shard. When he finishes, he presses his to his lips and then drops it gently into a basin of still water. The jade sinks, not fast, not slow, just eventually. The others follow. This isn't performance, it's closure. Historians still argue whether this rite was reserved for the elite or quietly practiced in villages by local elders. Some believe it began during a drought, when punishment grew so routine that even the gods wept. Others suggest it originated with healers, who needed a way to release the pain they carried from others. A fringe account describes a man who carved the names of every soul he judged into clay, then crushed the tablets beneath his feet before death. No one knows if it was symbolic or simply desperate. Back by the stone, the air changes. A young priest lights a ring of incense secable again, but mingled with crushed shell and something like pine. The smell lifts you, grounded and weightless all at once. Then a chant begins. Simple, wordless. A hum more than a hymn. And one by one, the confessors stand, touch the stone, and walk away barefoot into the grass. No applause, no ritual flourishes, just quiet. You're allowed to step up if you like. The guards nod once. You hesitate because, of course, you're not from here, not trained in their world, not bound by their rules. But still, something calls you. You walk to the stone, kneel, and feel its warmth. You don't speak. You don't need to. But, in your mind, you think of every punishment you've witnessed, every strange ceremony, every line drawn, every feather placed, every name whispered in shame. And you realize this wasn't a catalogue of cruelty. It was a mirror. Every strange Aztec punishment carried meaning, not just to balance the cosmos or please the gods, but to reflect something painfully human. Our appetite for justice, our hunger for correction, our belief that pain can teach, but that sometimes it's silence that changes us most. You rise, step back, and take one last look at the city sprawled beneath you. From above, it doesn't look brutal or fearful. It looks thoughtful, like a world built not just of pyramids and warriors, but of people trying, failing, punishing, and healing, sometimes all in the same breath. A boy runs past with a rattle in one hand and a flower in the other. A woman offers a bowl of tamales to a stranger with no name. And, in a quiet courtyard, a forgotten girl lights a fire she wasn't supposed to have and is forgiven. The wind sighs. You step down from the stone, the last echoes fading behind you. And now, as you drift gently into sleep, let the echoes of that distant city fade into silence. Picture the flicker of torches softening into stars, Imagine the hush of feathers settling around you, one by one, as if even your mistakes have grown wings and flown off into the night. The air cools. The drums are silent now. The temples cast no judgment. You are no priest, no scribe, no child balancing bowls of sand. You're just you curled in soft sheets, listening to the last sighs of a world that once believed every action had weight, every shadow its own language, and every misstep a path home again. Your feet do not burn. Your voice is not mocked. Whatever guilt you carried into this story has already begun to dissolve, like jade disappearing into deep water. So rest easy. The gods are at peace tonight. No feathers drift. No flames rage. Only the slow rhythm of your breath, steady and calm, returning you gently to the space of now, a space where dreams wait not as punishment, but as invitation. You've walked through justice, danced with shame, and watched the gods themselves bow to children with reed staffs. And now, you let go. You let it all go. Tomorrow, the city will rise again. The chants will resume. But for now, there is only this moment, this breath, and you, still and weightless, fading into sleep with the hush of obsidian winds against your cheek. Sweet dreams.